The billionaire who came to Maple Harbor. Maple Harbor had always been the kind of town people passed on postcards and underestimated in boardrooms. It curved around a silver-blue bay, its old fishing docks leaning into the wind, its cedar houses wearing salt and thyme like a second skin. Amelia Hart arrived there not as a tourist, not as a daughter of anyone's memory, but as the woman behind Heartstone Properties. The billionaire who could turn neglected waterfronts into glass towers, private marinas, and names that wealthy people whispered with approval. To her, Maple Harbor was a coastal asset waiting to be awakened. To the people who lived there, it was the place where fathers had drowned, children had learned to ride bicycles, widows still set 2 cups on the table, and every street seemed to remember someone's name. The first thing Amelia noticed was that the town smelled of rain and wood smoke. It was a strangely inconvenient scent. It did not belong to the world she had built for herself, where elevators smelled faintly of polished steel, hotel suites smelled of white lilies arranged by assistants, and meeting rooms smelled of coffee nobody had time to drink. Maple Harbor smelled alive in a way that made no apology for being small. Her black sedan moved slowly along Harbor Road, tires hissing over damp pavement. Beyond the window, fishing boats rocked against their ropes, their painted hulls chipped, their names lettered with affection instead of branding. Maggie's bakery had a striped awning faded by years of weather. A boy in a yellow raincoat chased a golden retriever past the post office. An elderly man lifted one hand toward the car without knowing who sat inside, a gesture so habitual that Amelia almost raised her own hand in return almost. Instead, she looked down at the folder on her lap. Maple Harbor Waterfront Redevelopment Initiative, projected economic uplift 38% within 5 years, estimated job creation. 600 foreign direct and indirect roles, acquisition progress, 71% of target parcels under conditional agreement. Remaining resistance, emotional, local, unstructured. That last line had been written by Victor Lang, her chief strategy officer, in his usual sleek shorthand. Victor had a talent for turning people into obstacles and obstacles into language clean enough to survive a board presentation. Amelia appreciated that. Clean language made messy things easier to move. Her phone vibrated. Victor's name flashed across the screen. She 5 minutes out? Good. Caldwell says the hall is full. His voice was smooth, with that faint private club warmth he used when delivering pressure as though it were courtesy. Expect theater, fishermen, retirees, maybe someone crying over a bait shop. Smile through it. Amelia watched a woman pin flyers to a notice board outside the community center. The flyer had bold hand-painted letters, "Save our harbor." "I don't smile through negotiations," Amelia said. "No, you win them. That's why the board loves you." The board loved returns. Her father loved legacy. The press loved the story of a woman who had made billion-dollar men nervous by age 34. Whether anyone loved Amelia Hart herself was a question she had trained herself not to ask. Victor continued. "One more thing. No Reed will likely speak. The carpenter, volunteer fire captain, unofficial saint of the working class. His family owns one of the parcels near the old cannery. He's organized most of the opposition." Amelia closed the folder. "Then I'll address his concerns." "He doesn't have concerns, Amelia. He has roots, much harder to price." For reasons she could not explain, that sentence irritated her more than it should have. The sedan turned past a row of wind-bent maples and stopped in front of the Maple Harbor Community Hall. It was a low white building with peeling trim, a cupola, and windows glowing gold against the grey afternoon. Outside, people had gathered in small clusters despite the cold. They stopped talking when Amelia stepped out. She was accustomed to silence in New York. Silence followed her because people wanted to see what she would do. Here silence felt different. Less admiration, more judgment. Amelia wore a cream wool coat over a charcoal dress, her dark hair pinned neatly at the nape of her neck, no unnecessary jewelry, no nervous gestures. She had learned early that elegance could function as armor, provided there were no visible cracks. Mayor Evelyn Caldwell met her at the steps, smiling with the careful brightness of a woman who had rehearsed sincerity. She was in her late 50s, silver hair swept into a rigid bob, a pearl brooch pinned to her navy blazons. Hart, welcome to Maple Harbor. Mayor Caldwell, we're grateful you came in person. Amelia glanced toward the watching residents, some curious, some hostile, some afraid. A project of this scale deserves that. The mayor's smile tightened slightly, as if even agreement had edges. Yes, well, they're passionate people. Inside, the hall was warmer than Amelia expected and more crowded. Folding chairs had been arranged in rows, but people lined the walls too. Young parents with children asleep against their shoulders, old men in wool caps, shop owners still wearing aprons, teenagers pretending not to care and failing. At the back, an American flag stood beside a faded photograph of the harbor, taken decades earlier, before storms had damaged the pier, before the cannery roof caved in, before. Towns like this began appearing in investment memos under words such as underutilized. Amelia set her laptop on the front table. Beside her, Victor's local legal consultant arranged documents. Mayor Caldwell took the podium and tapped the microphone. A sharp squeal cut through the hall. Someone muttered, "Good start." A few people laughed. Amelia did not. The mayor cleared her throat. Thank you all for coming. Tonight, Heartstone Properties will present its proposal for the revitalization of our waterfront district. I ask that we remain respectful. This is a conversation about Maple Harbor's future. Whose future? A voice called from the left. The mayor ignored it. Miss Hart, Amelia rose. She had spoken in rooms where the chandeliers cost more than this entire building. She had presented to sovereign funds, ministers, hostile shareholders, men who tried to interrupt before she finished her first sentence. She knew how to command attention without raising her voice. Still, as she faced the people of Maple Harbor, something in the hall resisted being commanded. "Good evening," she began. "Thank you for allowing me to speak with you. I know there has been concern about Heartstone's proposed investment. I'd like to share what this project actually offers: infrastructure repair, local employment, increased tax revenue, a restored waterfront, and long-term economic stability. Behind her, the first slide appeared, a luminous rendering of the future: glass-fronted villas, a boutique hotel shaped like a crescent facing the bay, a marina dotted with sleek white boats, restaurants with terraces, people in linen clothing walking beneath lights strung artistically over stone pathways. It was beautiful. Amelia knew it was beautiful because beauty, properly financed, could be engineered. This design preserved coastal access while replacing unsafe structures with resilient development. The current pier is failing. The cannery site is contaminated. Many waterfront buildings are below code. Without significant capital intervention, Maple Harbor risks continued decline. A woman in the second row lowered her eyes. Amelia moved to the next slide. Charts, projections. It steadied her. The resort will generate an estimated $12 million annually in local revenue by year 5. We plan to prioritize local hiring during construction and operations. Heartstone will also contribute to road improvements, stormwater management, and public space upgrades. The hall remained quiet, too quiet. She continued, voice calm, precise, polished by years of never letting doubt show. Progress is not the enemy of memory. Done responsibly, this project can honor Maple Harbor's past while ensuring it has a future. A chair scraped near the middle of the room. A man stood. Amelia knew at once it was Noah Reed. Not because he looked like a saint, as Victor had said. Saints belonged in stained glass, washed in gentle light. This man looked too real for that. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark flannel shirt beneath a weathered canvas jacket. His hands were rough, carpenter's hands, scarred across the knuckles. His brown hair was slightly damp from the rain, and his face held the kind of restrained anger that did not burn fast, but could warm a room for years. He did not look at the mayor, he looked only at Amelia. "You said the pier is failing," he said. His voice was low, steady, not theatrical that made it more dangerous. Amelia folded her hands lightly in front of her. "It is. My grandfather helped build that pier after the war. Half the men in this room have repaired it at one time or another. When the north section broke in the storm of '98, people didn't wait for investors. They showed up with hammers, rope, and coffee." A murmur moved through the hall. Amelia kept her expression neutral. "Community effort is admirable, Mr. Reed. It doesn't change the structural report. No, but it changes what you think you're looking at." Something in the sentence landed harder than it should have. Noah turned slightly, not away from her but toward the room, as if gathering the people behind him, without asking for permission. "That cannery you called contaminated. My grandmother packed herring there for 26 years. So did Mrs. Alvarez's mother. So did half the women who kept this town fed when the fishing runs collapsed. The bait shop on your acquisition map, per parcel W14, belongs to Pete Donnelly. His wife died there, right behind the counter, laughing at some terrible joke. He still opens at 5 every morning, because fishermen trust him to know the weather better than the radio." Amelia's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Numbers could not answer that kind of argument, not because they were wrong, but because they were speaking from a different room. Noah looked back at the glowing rendering. "And where's the cemetery?" Amelia glanced at her consultant. The man shifted papers. "The cemetery is outside the primary development boundary." "Outside?" No repeated. "You put a private access road along its edge." A wave of whispering rose. Mayor Caldwell leaned toward the microphone. "Mr. Reed, that road is preliminary." "My father is buried there," Noah said. The hall went still. He did not raise his voice, he didn't need to. "My mother too. My little brother who lived 3 days, Mrs. Pike's husband, the crew of the Elise May, whose boat never came back. You can call it outside the boundary, but we know what it means when a town starts moving around its dead to make guests feel comfortable." Amelia felt, for the first time that evening, a small fracture in the smooth surface of her composure. Not guilt. She would not call it guilt. She had not drawn the access road. She had not known about the graves. Heartstone had conducted surveys, environmental studies, title reviews. There were procedures. There were departments for such details, but Noah Reed's eyes were on her, as if details were exactly where a person's conscience lived. "I understand this is emotional," she said carefully. His mouth moved, almost a smile, but there was no humor in it. "That's the problem. You think emotional means irrational." A few people nodded. Someone whispered, "Exactly." Amelia felt heat rise beneath her collar, but her voice remained controlled. "No. I think emotion deserves respect, but decisions affecting long must also be made with facts. Survival. Facts," No said. "All right, here's one. When seasonal towns become luxury towns, local families don't get upgraded, they get priced out. Taxes rise, rents rise. Small businesses become gift shops, selling candles named after things that used to be real." A ripple of rough laughter moved through the room, short and painful. No stepped into the aisle. "You offer jobs. Fine. But what kind? Cleaning rooms in a hotel built where people used to own their own docks. Serving cocktails to strangers on land our grandparents broke their backs to keep. You call it revitalization. We call it being invited to work at our own funeral." The words struck the room like a wave against the seawall. Amelia looked at the faces before her. The old man who had waved outside now sat with both hands gripping a cane. A woman in a bakery apron wiped her cheek angrily, as though furious at herself for crying. A young mother bounced a baby against her shoulder. while staring at Amelia with exhausted suspicion. For the first time, Amelia understood that she had not entered a negotiation. She had walked into a house where everyone believed she had come to remove the photographs from the walls. Still, retreat was not in her nature. "I did not come here to erase anyone," she said, and there was a faint edge beneath the polish now. "I came because Maple Harbor has been ignored by capital, by the state, and by time. Sentiment will not repair seawalls. Memory will not remediate soil. Pride will not keep young people employed." Noah's gaze sharpened. "No," he said quietly. "But money without memory turns everything into something it can sell." The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of choosing sides. Amelia inhaled slowly. She could feel Mayor Caldwell's anxiety beside her, the consultant's impatience, the town's resistance pressing toward her like weather. She thought of the board expecting signatures, of Victor telling her roots were hard to price, of her father's voice from childhood saying, "If you cannot control the room, you do not belong in it." So she controlled it. "Heartstone has already secured agreements from a majority of waterfront owners," she said. "We will continue individual discussions with remaining stakeholders, including families with historic ties to the district. I am willing to review the cemetery access issue personally. I am willing to establish a local advisory committee. But I will not pretend that doing nothing is an act of protection." No held her gaze for a long moment. Then he said, "And I won't pretend selling home is the same as saving it." It was not shouted. It did not need applause. Yet several people stood with him anyway, one by one, not in chaos but in solidarity. The gesture was simple, almost old-fashioned, and somehow more devastating than anger. Amelia closed her laptop after the meeting ended, each click of the clasp too loud in the dispersing hall. People avoided her as they left, but not completely. They looked at her, then looked away, as though she were both dangerous and disappointing. Mayor Caldwell hovered, offering brittle reassurances. "That went better than expected," the mayor said. Amelia turned to her. "Did it? Well, they needed to vent. No is influential, but not everyone can afford sentiment forever." The phrase settled coldly between them. Outside, dusk had fallen. Rain moved in fine silver lines beneath the street lamps. Amelia declined the mayor's offer to walk her to the car. She needed a moment without voices, without projections, without the strange ache Noah Reed had planted in the center of her very expensive certainty. The harbor breathed in the dark beyond the road. She stood beneath the community hall awning, watching mist gather over the water. Somewhere in the distance, a bell rang from a buoy, lonely and patient. For one irrational second, she wondered what it would be like to belong to a place so completely that you could stand up in a crowded room and speak of graves without shame. Her driver opened the rear door of the sedan. "Mrs. Hart?" She stepped toward the car and stopped. On the back seat lay a cream envelope, plain, unmarked. No courier label, no company seal. Her name had been written across the front in dark blue ink, Amelia Hart. A cold thread moved through her. "Did someone deliver this?" she asked. The driver frowned. "I didn't see anyone, ma'am. It wasn't there when we arrived." Amelia picked it up. The paper was thick, old-fashioned, slightly damp at one corner from the weather. For a moment she only stared at her name, written by a hand she did not know in a town she had never visited before today. Then she opened it. Inside was a photograph. The image had faded with age, its edges softened, but the woman in it was unmistakable. Amelia's breath caught so sharply it hurt. Her mother stood in front of Maple Harbor's abandoned lighthouse. Younger than Amelia had ever seen her except in formal portraits, her hair loose in the sea wind, her hand lifted as though shading her eyes from the sun. She was not wearing pearls. She was not standing beside Amelia's father at some charity gala. She was smiling, unguarded, radiant, alive in a way Amelia had never known her to be. Eleanor Hart, in Maple Harbor. Amelia turned the photograph over with fingers that had signed billion-dollar contracts without trembling. On the back, in the same blue ink, someone had written only 6 words. Ask what your mother lost. For nearly 10 minutes, Amelia Hart stood in the quiet of her hotel suite, with the photograph in her hand, and the ocean pressing its grey breath against the windows. Maple Harbor lay below her like a town painted from memory. Shingled roofs damp with mist, narrow streets sloping toward the docks, windows lit in soft yellow against the afternoon gloom. It did not look like a battlefield. It looked harmless, almost fragile, the kind of place executives in Manhattan described as charming, before calculating the value of its shoreline by the square foot. Amelia had come prepared for resistance. She had not come prepared for her mother. The photograph rested on the marble counter, beside her untouched coffee. Eleanor Hart's younger face seemed to glow beneath the suite's cold lights, her smile impossibly open. Amelia had spent her life remembering her mother as a woman of controlled gestures and distant eyes, a woman who wore silk blouses like armor and looked out of penthouse windows as if she were trapped behind glass. Eleanor had died with half her life folded away in silence, and Amelia had never known whether that silence was dignity, regret, or punishment. Now some stranger had placed a crack in that silence. Ask what your mother lost. Amelia inhaled slowly, the way she did before boardroom battles. A threat, a tactic, of course it was. Maple Harbor had already made it clear that Heartstone Properties was not welcome. A dramatic old photograph, a cryptic message, her mother's name. Someone had done their research. People became sentimental when they had no leverage. They reached for the dead when numbers did not favor them. She picked up her phone and called Victor Lang. He answered on the second ring, his voice smooth and efficient. Amelia, I assume you've reviewed the afternoon briefing. Not yet. She looked down at the photograph. Did our local outreach team uncover any connection between my mother and Maple Harbor? There was a small pause, not long enough to accuse, long enough to notice. Your mother, Victor asked. Yes, I'm not aware of any meaningful connection. Why? Amelia turned the photo over again, staring at the blue ink question as if force alone could make it confess. Someone left an envelope for me at the hotel. A photograph. Eleanor in front of the lighthouse. This time, Victor's silence sharpened. That sounds like emotional manipulation, he said at last. They're trying to unsettle you. That was my conclusion. Then don't give them the satisfaction. The town is nervous. People invent stories when property changes hands. Stay focused on the land assembly. We have momentum. A word Amelia trusted. It had pushed towers up through old neighborhoods, had taken overlooked parcels and turned them into destinations. Momentum did not ask about ghosts. And yet, after she ended the call, she found herself still staring at the abandoned lighthouse in the photograph. By 4 o'clock, she had told herself 3 separate times that she was not going. By 4:30, she was alone along the road that curved toward the eastern point of Maple Harbor. The wind was colder near the water. It slipped beneath the collar of her cream coat and tugged at the neat knot of her hair until strands loosened around her face. Amelia's heels were not made for uneven coastal pavement, and every few steps she had to avoid puddles left by morning rain. A woman passing with a basket of laundry recognized her, stared, then looked away too quickly. 2 fishermen stopped talking as she neared. Through the window of a cafe, she saw 3 heads turn in unison. So this was how it felt to be the storm coming in. She had been called ruthless before, brilliant, ice-blooded, visionary. Depending on the newspaper and the profit margin, the adjectives changed. But those words had always met her at a distance. Here, suspicion had a human temperature. It watched her from porches. It hid behind lace curtains. It followed the click of her shoes on old stone. The lighthouse stood at the end of a grassy rise, white paint peeling in long strips from its tower, the lantern room dark, At its base, a wooden railing leaned dangerously over the path down to the rocks. Beside it, a man knelt with a toolbox open near his boot, one hand steadying a length of new timber while the other drove a screw into place. Amelia recognized him before he looked up. No Reed. He was not dressed like an activist leader now. No town hall anger. No crowd at his back, just faded jeans, a dark work jacket, and hair ruffled by the wind. His sleeves were pushed up, despite the cold, revealing forearms marked with sawdust and old nicks. There was something quietly stubborn in the set of his shoulders, the kind of strength that did not announce itself, because it had never had the luxury of being decorative. He glanced up at the sound of her approach. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, his eyes moved from her expensive coat, and the corner of his mouth tightened. Lost? On your way to a hostile takeover? Amelia should have turned around. Instead, she tucked her hands into her coat pockets and stepped closer. Do you always repair public property in the rain, Mr. Reed? When it's broken? Is the town paying you? No, then that's either generous or inefficient. He gave a short laugh, not amused enough to be warm. And that right there is why people don't want you deciding what this place is worth. The wind moved between them, carrying the smell of salt and wet wood. Amelia looked at the railing. The repair was precise, clean, stronger than what had been there before. You think refusing change is nobler. I think buying a town you don't understand is dangerous. I'm not buying the town. No, just the waterfront, the old bakery block, 3 family lots near the marina, and enough memory to make the rest feel like they've been evicted from their own lives. His words struck closer than she wanted. Amelia kept her expression level. Sentiment doesn't pay property tax. It doesn't keep shops open in February. It doesn't fix roofs, debts, or failing infrastructure. No, said, setting the screwdriver down. But neither does pretending people are obstacles on a spreadsheet. Amelia's gaze sharpened. You assume I don't see people. I assume you see what people can be converted into. It was not cruel, exactly. That made it worse. His anger was controlled, but beneath it lived something older than protest. Fear, perhaps, though he would never call it that. Amelia had negotiated with men who shouted to perform power. No, did not perform. He simply stood there in the wind with collused hands and eyes, the color of storm-dark cedar, saying the thing others were too polite to say. She turned toward the lighthouse. Up close, it matched the photograph too well. The same curve of stone at the base, the same broken line where wild grass met rock. Her mother had stood here, smiling at someone beyond the camera. Do you know anything about this lighthouse? Amelia asked, before she could stop herself. Noah studied her. Everybody knows something about it. That isn't an answer. It's the answer outsiders get. There it was again, outsider. A word spoken softly enough to sound factual, not insulting, and somehow more final because of it. Amelia drew the photograph from inside her coat. For a second, Noah's guarded expression did not change. Then he saw the image. A flicker crossed his face. Small, fast, but real. You've seen this before, Amelia said. You hesitated. I was looking. At what? At someone who shouldn't be in your pocket if you're telling the truth about why you came here. The air seemed to thin. Amelia held the photograph closer to herself. My mother is not a negotiation tool. Then maybe ask yourself why someone thought you needed reminding she was human. That did hurt. It landed in a place she had boarded up long ago. A place where a little girl in patent shoes had waited outside closed bedroom doors, while adults lowered their voices. Amelia looked away first, irritated by the sting in her eyes, and more irritated that Noah might have seen it. I know exactly who my mother was, she said. Noah's reply was quiet. Do you? The question followed her back into town. She left the lighthouse without another word, but the encounter did not end. It moved with her past the bait shop with its faded blue awning, past a hardware store where a handwritten sign advertised winter discounts, No one seemed to be buying. Past the bakery with darkened windows and a cracked gold leaf sign that reads, established 1952. The old bakery drew her attention because Lily Reed was inside. Amelia had met Noah's younger sister only briefly the day before, a slender woman with anxious eyes and flour dust permanently embedded beneath her nails. Now Lily stood behind the glass door, speaking with an older man in a wool cap. Her face was pale, her hands clasped too tightly around a stack of envelopes. When Lily noticed Amelia on the sidewalk, panic flashed across her features. Not dislike, panic. Amelia slowed, but Lily turned away quickly, as if pretending not to see her could erase the moment. Inside the next hour, Amelia learned what the polished briefing folders had not properly conveyed. She stopped at a small bookstore to escape the rain, and the owner, a woman named June with silver hair and a cardigan stretched at the elbows, tried at first to be civil in the brittle way people were civil to storms. "Eurems, Hart," June said, arranging a row of postcards that no tourist had bought in days. I suppose you've come to see what can be improved." Amelia accepted the rebuke because it was gentler than most. She bought a local history booklet she did not need, then noticed the overdue notice half hidden beneath the register. June saw her glance and smiled with tired embarrassment. Not all of us can afford principles. Some of us can barely afford heat. That one sentence opened the door to the town Amelia's consultants had reduced to charts. A fisherman's wife who came in for packing tape admitted. Their boat needed an engine repair they could not fund. The cafe owner across the street had mortgaged her house twice to keep 6 employees through winter. The family who ran the inn had a son in college and a roof patched with borrowed money. There were medical bills, unpaid suppliers, insurance premiums rising after every coastal storm. Maple Harbor was not simply resisting because it loved old things. It was dividing because love had become expensive. By dusk, Amelia sat alone in a corner booth at the cafe, her untouched tea cooling beside her. Around her, conversations lowered and rose like waves. At one table, 2 sisters argued over whether selling their father's boathouse made them practical or traitors. Near the counter, an old man muttered that preservation was a luxury for people without creditors. A waitress defended the Harbor Festival with tears bright in her eyes, then confessed she might have to move inland if rent rose again. Amelia listened, and something inside her careful certainty began to rearrange. She had thought Maple Harbor saw her as a villain because it misunderstood money. Now she realized the town understood money intimately. It understood the humiliation of needing it, the shame of lacking it, the way debt could make a person sign away something sacred and then hate the hand that offered relief. Her project was not arriving at a dying town. It was arriving at a frightened one. And frightened people did not always know whether rescue was salvation or erasure. Across the street, through rain-beaded glass, the bakery windows remained dark. Noah returned there after sundown with damp hair, cold fingers, and the deep ache of a man who had spent the day fixing things too small to fix the larger collapse. He entered through the back door, expecting the familiar smell of yeast and sugar that had lived in the walls since his grandfather's time. Instead, he found the kitchen lights off and Lily sitting at the old prep table with her coat still on. A folder lay open before her. "No," stopped. Lily looked up too quickly. "You're back early. What is that?" "Nothing." He crossed the room, her hand moved to close the folder, but he was faster. Not harsh, just certain. The top page bore Heartstone Properties letterhead, Preliminary Acquisition Agreement, for Reed's Bakery Building and adjacent parcel. Noah read the words once, then again, because the first time his heart refused to understand them. At the bottom of the page, beneath clauses and conditions and a purchase price that would erase years of debt in a single stroke, Lily's signature sat in blue ink, his sister's signature. For a moment, the old bakery was so silent. He could hear rain ticking against the rear window. Lily's eyes filled before she spoke. "No, I was going to tell you." He looked at her, and the betrayal on his face was not anger yet. It was worse. It was heartbreak finding its shape. "You signed with them?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lily reached for the paper as if she could pull the truth back into her hands. "I didn't have a choice." Noah stared down at the Heartstone name, bold and black at the top of the page, and something inside him went very still outside. Maple Harbor's lights trembled in the rain, each one small, stubborn, and afraid of going out. Rain had a way of making Maple Harbor feel smaller. It pressed against the bakery windows in silver threads, blurred the street lamps into halos, softened the painted signs along Harbor Lane until every shop looked like a memory half washed away. Inside Reed's bakery, the air still carried the faint sweetness of cinnamon and old flour, but beneath it lingered something sharper now: fear, damp wool, and the metallic taste of words that could not be taken back. Noah stood with the agreement in his hand. Lily stood across from him, her shoulders drawn inward, her apron still dusted with flour, as if she had been caught in the middle of an ordinary day and dragged into a courtroom. Amelia had not meant to remain there. She had come only because Lily had asked for a few clarifications about closing procedures, because Amelia had convinced herself that meeting sellers face to face was not ruthless if she was polite, not predatory if the offer was generous, not destruction if the contract was clean. But now, standing near the counter beneath a row of cooling racks, she felt the fragile heat of a family breaking open around her. And for the first time since arriving in Maple Harbor, she understood that paper could make a sound. Not when it was signed, when it was discovered. Noah lowered the document slowly, as though any sudden motion might tear through the last thread between him and his sister. "How long?" he asked. Lily wiped at her cheek with the back of her hand, angry at herself for crying before she had even begun to defend herself. 3 weeks. His expression changed, not dramatically, not loudly, but with a subtle collapse that made Amelia look away. 3 weeks meant conversations they had shared, arguments they had survived, breakfasts Lily had served him with powdered sugar on her wrist, all while carrying this secret alone. "You let me stand out there," Noah said, "in front of half the town, arguing against Heartstone, while you had already signed their papers. I signed a preliminary agreement. It's not final. It has your name on it, and the bank has ours on 3 overdue notices." The words landed harder than thunder. Noah's jaw tightened. "You should have told me." Lily laughed once, but there was humor in it. It was the kind of laugh people used when crying would make them too vulnerable. "When between you fixing Mrs. Donnelly's porch for free and organizing another petition meeting, or while you were telling everyone we would never sell because Reeds don't give up?" His eyes flicked, wounded. Lily pressed both hands to the edge of the counter. Her fingers were red from washing trays in hot water. Amelia noticed that. She noticed everything she had not noticed before. The small crack in the display glass, the patch near the ceiling where damp had begun to bloom, the ancient register that stuck on every 3rd sale. Pride had kept this place upright, yes, but pride had not repaired it. "Our ovens are failing," Lily said, quieter now. "The roof leaks. Dad's rehab bills didn't stop just because he died. No, they became debt, his last hospital stay alone." "Don't know you don't," her voice broke, then steadied with the desperate force of someone who had rehearsed this conversation in the dark for months. "You don't get to make Dad sacred every time money enters the room. I loved him too. I sat beside his bed too. I watched the invoices come in, while you were trying to keep his old fishing boat from rotting, because you thought it would make him happy when he came home." Noah looked at her then as if she had struck him. Amelia's hand tightened around the handle of her umbrella. She had negotiated purchases worth hundreds of millions without flinching. She had stared down men who thought her sharpness was arrogance until it made them rich. But she had no defense against Lily Reed, saying hospital bills with flour on her apron. Lily took a breath that shuddered in her chest. I didn't sign because I wanted marble balconies on our street. I signed because I am tired of opening the bakery every morning, wondering if this is the day the locks get changed. Noah's voice came rough. And you thought selling to her was the answer. Not Heartstone, not the company, her. Amelia accepted the blow without moving. Lily glanced at Amelia and shame crossed her face. I thought surviving was the answer. For a moment, the only sound was rain. Noah folded the agreement once, carefully, along a line that was not meant to be folded. The precision of it frightened Amelia more than anger would have. Our grandparents built this place, he said. I know. Mom worked here until her hands swelled during the winter, I know. Dad sold bread at dawn after chemo because he said people needed something warm before work, I know. No. Lily's tears spilled again. I know every story, I was here for them too. But memories don't pay interest. They don't call the lender and ask for patience. They don't cover medication. They don't keep the lights on. His face hardened. Not because he did not understand, but because he did. Because understanding made the betrayal crueler. If Lily had sold out of greed, he could have hated her cleanly. But desperation made enemies of people who still loved each other. Amelia set her umbrella down. No, she said. He turned toward her with eyes the color of stormwater. Don't. The word was quiet, but it closed the space between them like a slammed door. She continued anyway. Because a part of her still believed that every crisis had an offer attached to it. If only one knew how to structure the terms. I wasn't aware of the extent of the bakery's debt when my acquisition team began negotiations. If Lily had disclosed, she shouldn't have had to disclose her humiliation to strangers. Amelia absorbed that. Then, softer, no, she shouldn't. The admission seemed to surprise him. It surprised her too. She looked at Lily. The agreement includes the purchase price for the building and parcel. But Heartstone can provide additional transitional assistance, private, not public, medical debt relief, relocation support if necessary, business re-establishment funds under Lily's name. If she wants to reopen elsewhere, we can structure that. Lily stared at her as if hope itself were dangerous. Noah's expression darkened. There it is, he said. Amelia turned back to him. There what is? The polish, the perfect language. You don't even call it money, do you? You call it assistance, support, a structure. His hand closed around the folded contract. You think if you wrap a check in enough legal words, it stops being hush money. That isn't what I'm offering. You are offering to make the problem quiet. I'm offering to reduce harm. No, he said, stepping closer. You're offering to buy the right to hurt people efficiently. Amelia felt the sting before she could prepare for it. Not because he shouted. He did not. But because he had found the place where her confidence was thinnest. For years, she had told herself that harm, when inevitable, could be managed. That displacement, when profitable enough, could be compensated. That if the numbers were fair, the conscience could be calm. But Maple Harbor did not speak in numbers. It spoke in a sister's shaking hands, in a brother's betrayed silence, in a bakery where generations had measured time by the rise of dough. I don't need your money, Noah said. Lily flinched. You don't get to decide that for me. The sentence froze them both. Noah turned to her slowly. Lily looked terrified of what she had said, but she did not take it back. You don't, no. You took over everything after Dad got sick. You fixed, carried, fought, protected. And I let you. This place is mine too. The debt is mine too. The fear is mine too. His throat moved. I was trying to save us, she whispered. And I was trying to save this town. What if both things are true? She asked. What if that's why it hurts so much? Noah had no answer outside. A car passed slowly through the rain, tires whispering against wet pavement. Its headlights slid over Amelia's coat, Lily's pale face, Noah's clenched hands. For one brief second, were illuminated like figures behind glass. Then darkness returned. Amelia wanted to say something that would mend what her arrival had torn wider. She wanted to tell them she had not known, that she was not a villain, that she had built her empire by seeing potential where others saw decay, by turning neglected properties into places people fought to enter. She wanted to explain that she had been taught early not to apologize for winning, but she had also been taught not to beg for understanding. So she only picked up her umbrella and said, "I'll pause the finalization of this parcel until Lily confirms how she wants to proceed." Noah gave a bitter smile. How generous. Lily closed her eyes. Amelia nodded once, as if accepting a business insult, but her fingers trembled slightly when she reached for the door. Noah noticed. That annoyed him more than if she had remained untouchable. She stepped out into the rain, and the bell above the bakery door rang behind her with a small, wounded sound. By the time Amelia returned to the Harborview Inn, the hem of her coat was soaked, and her hair had loosened from its neat twist. The lobby smelled of lemon polish and sea salt. A ceramic lighthouse lamp glowed on the reception desk. Everything here was modest, sincere, almost offensively uncurated. There were framed photographs of fishing boats, a bowl of peppermints, a guest book with actual handwriting. In her suite upstairs, her phone had not stopped vibrating. 3 missed calls from Victor Lang, 2 from legal, 1 message from her father's assistant, not her father. She stood by the window overlooking the black, restless harbor and called Victor first. He answered before the first ring completed. Amelia, finally. "Good evening to you too. This isn't the time for charm. I just finished with the board committee. They're concerned. They're always concerned when profits take longer than a spreadsheet. They're concerned because the Maple Harbor acquisition is being watched. A rival developer has begun making inquiries along the coast. If they reach even one holdout before we secure signatures, your projected margin changes dramatically." Amelia closed her eyes. Projected margin isn't the only variable. There was a pause, a small, enough for Victor to register the shift in her tone. What happened? She watched rain streak the glass. In the harbor, boat masts tilted like thin, dark needles. "One of the sellers is under financial distress. Our approach may need adjustment. Our approach is to acquire land legally at premium prices." "Premium is relative when people are drowning." Victor exhaled. "Amelia, don't romanticize them. Small towns always perform resistance until the number is high enough." Her eyes opened. There it was, said plainly. A thought she herself might have believed 2 weeks ago, though she would have wrapped it in better language. "They are not performing," she said. "No, they're negotiating, and if you lose momentum, they'll negotiate with someone else. The board expects all signatures within 10 days. Tell the board I don't answer to panic. You answer to fiduciary duty." "I am aware. Are you?" Victor's voice sharpened, then softened immediately, a practiced correction. "Look, I'm on your side, but you know how quickly confidence shifts. There are directors who still think your coastal initiative is too sentimental because of your mother's history." Amelia went still. "My mother's history?" Another pause. "I mean the family's old regional holdings. Nothing more." But the words had already entered the room. Her mother was not a subject people at Heartstone mentioned casually. Eleanor Hart existed in company law as a portrait in a private hall, elegant and pale, married into power, and then erased by it through illness, silence, and rumors Amelia had never been allowed to ask about without her father's face turning cold. "What do you know about my mother and this region?" Amelia asked. Victor gave a low laugh. "It's late. Don't let a difficult day turn into ghosts. Secure the parcels. That's what matters." The call ended with polite firmness on his side and a chill on hers. Amelia lowered the phone slowly for a long while, She stood without moving. The rain made the window look like it was weeping. She thought of Lily saying, "Pride will not keep the lights on." She thought of Noah looking at her as if she had arrived not with an investment proposal, but with a blade. She thought unexpectedly of her mother's hands, long-fingered, cool, always resting just out of reach. Then Legal called again. This time she answered with no greeting. "Ms. Hart," said Malcolm Pierce, her senior counsel, his voice clipped and careful in the way lawyers sounded when something had become inconvenient. "We've completed the title review on the North Waterfront cluster. Most parcels are straightforward, but there's a complication with one lot." "How serious?" "Potentially significant. It's the old boathouse tract behind the Reed properties. Small, but strategically necessary for continuous shoreline access." Amelia pressed her fingers to her temple. "Who owns it?" "That's the issue. The town records list an outdated trust, but there was never a properly executed transfer after the original beneficiary died. We've found references to an unresolved inheritance claim." "From whom?" Paper rustled faintly on the other end. "That's the unusual part. The claim appears connected to a woman's maiden name before marriage. The file is incomplete, but the name appears more than once in handwritten county notes." Amelia's heartbeat slowed, each suddenly distinct. "What name?" Malcolm hesitated, then he said it. "Eleanor Whitcomb." The room seemed to tilt. Amelia stared at her reflection in the rain-dark window, the expensive coat, the controlled face, the woman who had come to Maple Harbor to buy land from strangers. But Eleanor Whitcomb had been her mother before she became Eleanor Hart. And somewhere in this town, beneath contracts, debts, and old resentments, a piece of land was refusing to be sold because it still remembered her name. For the first time in years, Amelia Hart did not sleep with her phone beside her pillow. It lay on the small wooden desk across the room, face down, silenced, as if distance could reduce the weight of the name Malcolm had spoken. Eleanor Whitcomb. Not Eleanor Hart, the polished wife in archived charity photographs, wearing pearls and a smile that never reached her eyes. Not the woman Amelia remembered as beautiful, in the way winter was beautiful, white, cold, untouchable. Eleanor Whitcomb sounded like someone who might have had muddy shoes, wind-tangled hair, and a life before marble staircases and private schools. Amelia had always believed her mother came from the same world as her father. That was what Richard Hart had allowed everyone to believe. Eleanor had been presented as a suitable woman from a suitable family, quiet enough not to compete with him, graceful enough to stand beside him, educated enough to make his empire seem softer. But Maple Harbor had written her name into old county notes. That single fact unsettled Amelia more than any failed negotiation could have. By dawn, rain had rinsed the town clean. A pale silver light spread over the harbor, touching the wet roofs, the fishing boats, the gulls balancing on pilings like little judges. Amelia stood at the window of the Harbor Inn with a cup of coffee growing cold between her hands. She had meetings waiting, attorneys calling, investors expecting certainty. Instead, she kept looking at the narrow street below, where a man in a yellow raincoat swept water away from the door of his bakery, as if the whole town depended on that small act of order. She told herself she was only gathering information that was safe. Information could be categorized, verified, weaponized if necessary. Memory could not. At 8, she walked to the county records office without calling her driver. Her heels were not made for old brick sidewalks, and by the time she reached the square, the hem of her coat was damp, and a strand of hair had escaped its perfect knot. She noticed it in the glass of the courthouse door, and almost fixed it, then stopped. No one here seemed to care if the wind won. The records office smelled of paper, dust, and lemon cleaner. A clerk with round glasses and a cardigan the color of oatmeal looked up from a stack of folders. "Ms. Hart," the woman said, not warmly but not rudely either. In a small town, disapproval still had manners. I heard you might come by. Amelia set her bag on the counter. I'm looking for historical property records connected to Eleanor Whitcomb. The clerk's fingers paused. It lasted less than a second, but Amelia had built her career on pauses. People revealed more in the spaces between words than in the words themselves. That's an old name, the clerk said. Yes, old records can be incomplete. I'm familiar with incomplete records. The woman gave her a look that was almost amused. I imagine you are. It took 20 minutes to retrieve the first box. Then another, then a ledger too fragile to photocopy. Amelia sat at a long table under buzzing fluorescent lights and opened a life her mother had never mentioned. Eleanor Whitcomb appeared in fragments. A student volunteer at the community library. A signature on a petition to protect public access to the shoreline. A handwritten note requesting copies of zoning maps. There was a grainy newspaper clipping from 29 years ago, folded into an unrelated file. In it, a younger Eleanor stood beside a group of local citizens near the pier, her hair loose, her face bright in a way that struck Amelia so sharply she forgot to breathe. Her mother had smiled like that once, not for photographers, not for gala guests, not for Richard Hart, for this town. Amelia touched the edge of the clipping with 2 fingers. She was unprepared for the tenderness that rose inside her, so sudden and humiliating that she drew her hand back as if the paper had burned her. By late morning, she had found almost nothing concrete about the waterfront parcel. There were mentions of a Whitcomb family, a dissolved trust, the old cannery lots, and a dispute involving outside developers before Heartstone existed in its current form. But every path ended in missing pages, unrecorded meetings, vague references to council review. Someone had once made a mess of the truth, or cleaned it too thoroughly. When she left the courthouse, the air smelled of salt and warm bread. She intended to return to the inn, send Malcolm a summary, and demand a deeper forensic search. Instead, she found herself walking toward the pier. Maple Harbor at midday was not charming in the curated way of places designed for visitors. It was chipped paint, rope burns, crooked signs, and men arguing over engine parts with the seriousness of diplomats. Children chased each other near the bait shop, shrieking when a gull swooped low enough to steal a French fry from a paper tray. One little boy wore rain boots were too large for him and stomped through puddles with the solemn joy of destruction. Amelia stopped near the railing at Heartstone. Waterfront meant frontage, valuation, unit yield, premium view corridors. Here it meant a teenage girl tying up her father's boat with practiced hands. It meant an old man sitting on a cooler, peeling an orange and handing half to a younger fisherman. Without asking, it meant a woman in a flour-dusted apron stepping out of the bakery to leave a paper bag on the bench beside a man who had been staring at the water too long. No invoice, no announcement, just bread given quietly. Amelia watched these transactions that were not transactions at all and felt, with a discomfort she could not name, that she was observing an economy in which she was illiterate. You look lost. She turned no read, stood several feet away, wearing a grey sweater under a canvas jacket. His hands rough and bare despite the cold. He looked like he belonged to the weather. That irritated her more than it should have. I'm not lost, she said. I'm walking. In those shoes, that's a brave choice. She glanced down at her heels, then back at him. Do you monitor footwear as part of your town defense strategy? Only when it threatens public safety. Against her will, the corner of her mouth moved, barely. Unfortunately, he saw it. His expression softened, and that was worse than sarcasm. Amelia could parry sarcasm. Softness slipped past defenses. Noah leaned against the railing beside her, leaving a careful distance. He did not ask why she was there. He did not accuse her of plotting. For several breaths they looked out at the boats, the water flashing under the weak sun. My grandmother said you came into the pharmacy yesterday, he said eventually. I bought aspirin. She said you looked like someone who needed tea more than aspirin. Your grandmother diagnoses strangers through retail purchases. She diagnoses everyone through everything. Amelia should have moved away. She had no reason to stand beside this man, this obstacle with kind eyes and infuriating loyalty. But she remained, watching two children fight over a red plastic shovel in the sand below the seawall. After a while she said, "Did you know my mother?" Whatever easy humor had been there disappeared. "Your mother?" "Eleanor Hart." Before that, Eleanor Whitcomb. The name changed him. Not visibly to anyone else perhaps, but Amelia saw it. The tightening of his jaw, the shadow that crossed his face before he concealed it. "I didn't," he said. "I was a kid when she would have already been gone. But you've heard the name." Noah looked toward the pharmacy across the street, its green awning fluttering in the wind. "You should ask May." "I tried. Yesterday she looked at me like she'd seen a ghost, then pretended she hadn't." That sounds like May when something hurts. The words were too simple, too direct. Amelia disliked them for that reason. In her world, pain was concealed behind procedure, converted into lawsuits, buried beneath confidentiality agreements. Here people said hurt as if it were weather. She left Noah at the pier and went to the pharmacy. Reed's pharmacy occupied the corner of Cedar and Main, squeezed between a hardware store and a second-hand bookshop. A bell rang when Amelia entered. The place was narrow and warm, lined with wooden shelves that held prescriptions, cough syrup, postcards, local honey, and knitted mittens with handwritten tags. Behind the counter stood May Reed, silver hair pinned in a loose knot, glasses resting low on her nose. She was speaking to an elderly man in a navy cap. "You tell Clara I know. She skipped her blood pressure pills because she thinks I won't notice," May said, sliding a paper bag toward him. "And tell her if she wants till I stop sending you, you blink too much." The man chuckled. "You're a menace, Mace. I'm a public service." He left with a smile, nodding politely at Amelia on his way out. May's smile faded. For a moment neither woman spoke. Outside, a bicycle bell chimed. Inside, the old wall clock ticked with stubborn authority. "You came back," May said. "Yes. Need more aspirin?" No. Amelia stepped closer to the counter. "I need to know why you recognized me." May removed her glasses and folded them slowly. "You have your mother's eyes." Amelia had been told many things about her appearance, that she had inherited her father's bone structure, her mother's posture, the Hart family's composed elegance, but no one had ever said she had Eleanor's eyes as though it was a wound reopening. "You knew her," Amelia said. May looked down at her hands. They were small, veined, capable hands. Hands that had counted pills, held babies, cooked meals, probably comforted half the town and scolded the other half. "I knew Eleanor before she became a Hart." The name sounded different in May's voice, fuller, alive. Amelia's throat tightened. Why did she never tell me she lived here? May's face creased with an old grief. Because some places don't let you leave cleanly, even when you run far enough. A customer entered then. A young mother with a feverish toddler pressed to her shoulder. May turned away at once, all brisk tenderness, asking about temperature, medicine, whether the child had eaten soup. Amelia stood among shelves of throat lozenges and greeting cards, forced to wait while ordinary care took precedence over the collapse of her family history. Strangely, she did not resent it. She watched May place a cool hand on the child's forehead, watched the mother exhale as if someone had finally shared the weight, watched an elderly pharmacist keep invisible threads tied around people who might otherwise drift apart. This, too, was a kind of wealth, not one that appeared on balance sheets, not one her father would have respected, but it held. When the mother left, Ma locked the front door and turned the sign to closed. Though it was still early afternoon, Amelia's pulse began to beat heavily. May came around the counter, up close. She looked tired in the way people look when they have carried a secret for too long, and resented both the carrying and the secret. Sit down, May said. I'd rather stand. Of course you would. Your mother did that too when she was afraid. The sentence struck cleanly, not cruel but precise. Amelia sat, lowered herself into the chair across from her. For a while she looked toward the window, where the town moved in fragments. A boy with a paper kite, a fisherman crossing the street, Noah in the distance speaking to someone by his truck. Eleanor was not what people here said she was. May began. She was stubborn, proud, too clever for her own peace. But she loved this harbor, loved it fiercely. Amelia held herself still. She worked with Thomas Reed and others to stop a sale of waterfront land. There were men from outside, promises of jobs, money, progress. Same words, different suits. May's eyes returned to Amelia's face. Then documents disappeared. Signatures turned up where they shouldn't have. Families lost options they thought were protected. And somehow, when the anger needed a face, it found your mother's. My mother was accused. May's mouth trembled once before she steadied it. 28 years ago, Eleanor Whitcomb left Maple Harbor after being accused of betraying the town during a land scandal. And Amelia, May's voice dropped, rough with sorrow. Some people here still believe she did it. For a moment, Amelia Hart forgot how to breathe. The diner sounds around her did not stop. Cups still touched saucers. A chair scraped against the old wooden floor. Someone at the counter laughed softly at something the waitress said. Outside, Maple Harbor continued its quiet afternoon life. Gulls wheeling over the roofs, salt wind pressing against the glass. But inside Amelia, something very old and sealed had cracked open. Her mother, not the composed woman in pearls from family portraits. Not the silent figure Amelia remembered standing at the top of marble staircases, distant even when she was near. Not Eleanor Hart, wife of Richard Hart, woman of society, woman of restraint, woman of unanswered questions. Eleanor Whitcomb. A girl from Maple Harbor, a girl who had loved this town, a girl accused of betraying it. Amelia's hands rested on the table, fingers perfectly still. It was the kind of stillness people mistook for calm because they did not know what it cost. May Reed watched her with the aching patience of someone who had waited years for grief to arrive at the correct door. I should have told you sooner, May said quietly. Amelia lifted her eyes. They were clear, too clear, polished by shock until nothing could cling to them. No, she said. You told me exactly when you chose to. May flinched at the elegance of the answer. It was not cruelty, not exactly. It was armor snapping into place. Piece by piece, Amelia stood. The motion was smooth. CEO smooth. Boardroom smooth. The woman who could hear a lie, lose a deal, fire a man twice her size, and never let the line of her mouth change. Thank you for the coffee, Mrs. Reed. Amelia. That single use of her name was almost enough to stop her almost. But Amelia had survived much harsher rooms by learning never to bleed where strangers could see. She placed several bills on the table, though May had not brought a check. Then turned toward the door. Noah was outside now, leaning against the side of his truck, speaking with old Ben from the bait shop. His sleeves were rolled to his forearms. Sawdust clung faintly to his work boots. When he saw Amelia step out, something in his expression changed. Not triumph, not anger. Concern, that was worse. She descended the diner steps as if she had every intention of walking past him without acknowledgement. No, pushed away from the truck. Amelia. I'm busy. You look like careful, she said, stopping, only because dignity demanded she not flee. If you finish that sentence, Mr. Reed, you might accidentally sound human. Old Ben glanced between them and wisely pretended to notice something urgent across the street. Noah took the insult without reacting. That, too, irritated her. He had always met her blade with stone today. He let it pass, as if he understood the difference between a weapon and a wound. May told you something, he said. Amelia's smile was faint and cold. Your town seems very gifted at preserving stories that damage women. His jaw tightened, but he did not deny it. If this is about your mother, My mother is none of your business. She might be more connected to mine than either of us knew. That struck, but Amelia did not give him the satisfaction of seeing it. She adjusted the cuff of her coat, a tiny gesture of control. I came here to evaluate land, Mr. Reed, not to stand trial for a dead woman's reputation. No one's asking you to stand trial. Really? She looked past him toward the harbor, where the waterfront she had once viewed through architectural overlays now seemed crowded with invisible accusations. That would make Maple Harbor the first place on Earth where people did not ask a Hart woman to pay for something. For the first time, Noah had no answer. The sky above them darkened with a strange swiftness. Grey clouds gathered over the water, bruised at the edges, pushed inland by a wind that smelled of rain and deep ocean unrest. The flags outside the post office snapped hard. A gull cried sharply and vanished behind. The rooftops. Noah looked up. Storms coming in faster than forecast. Amelia followed his gaze. How bad? Before he could answer, the town siren gave one long, low warning wail. Everything changed after that. Maple Harbor was not a town easily frightened by weather. Its people knew storms the way city people knew traffic. They had learned to tie down what mattered, move what could be saved, and pray over what could not. But this storm came hard, as if the sea had been waiting all day to throw itself against the town. By late afternoon, rain hammered the streets in silver sheets. The wind bent the trees along Harbor Road until their branches clawed at the air. Water rose at the low end of town, swallowing curbs, then porch steps. The old drainage system, neglected for years beneath layers of budget promises and mayoral speeches, failed near the waterfront. Amelia stood in the lobby of the Harbor Inn, phone pressed to her ear, watching rain lash the windows. I don't care what the regional manager says, she said. Release the emergency supply trucks from Portland now. Generators, blankets, bottled water, medical kits, portable heaters. Yes, under Heartstone Authorization. Now, across the lobby, Mrs. Alvarez from the bakery sat wrapped in a shawl, trembling more from fear than cold. Two children slept against each other on a couch, their shoes muddy, hair damp. Lily Reed moved between residents with towels from the inn laundry, her face pale but focused. The first evacuation had begun badly. A tree came down on Crescent Lane. 3 houses near the marsh took water through their back doors. Then came word that a group of residents had been trapped near the old pier when part of the access road flooded. Noah was already out there. Of course he was. Amelia ended one call and began another. This is Amelia Hart. I need the private helicopter grounded if visibility is unsafe, but keep the medical team on standby. Route truck through Route 6, not Harbor Road. Contact the county emergency office and tell them Maple Harbor has residents trapped near the pier, and get me satellite weather, not a cheerful forecast from someone behind a desk. Victor Lang called twice. She ignored him both times. Then a message appeared. You are not authorized to deploy company assets without board approval for non-corporate emergency use. Amelia stared at the words. For 1 second, the old world reached for her. Liability, optics, permission, control. Then, from outside came the sound of someone crying for their dog, a thin, broken voice swallowed by thunder. Amelia typed back, "Watch me." She took off her coat, handed it to Lily, and reached for the rain jacket someone had left over a chair. Lily blinked. "You're going out?" "Yes. You'll ruin those shoes." Amelia looked down at her Italian leather heels, now absurd in the face of water, rising through streets and men wading toward danger. A laugh escaped her, brief and almost painful. Then they can finally serve a purpose. By the time Amelia reached the flooded road near the pier, dusk had fallen in a storm-dark blur. Rain struck her face so hard it stung. Volunteers formed a line between the hardware store and the rescue trucks, passing sandbags, ropes, flashlights. Noah stood knee-deep in brown water, shouting instructions over the wind. He saw her and looked furious. "What are you doing here?" "Delivering supplies," Send someone else. I did, I came with them. This isn't a boardroom, Amelia. No, she shouted back. In a boardroom, men usually pretend disaster is strategy. Despite everything, his mouth almost moved toward a smile. Almost then a wave pushed against his legs, and the moment vanished. An older man and his wife were stranded in the second-floor room above the bait shop near the old pier. Two teenagers who had gone to help them were trapped on the outer stair when the railing broke. The water was not yet high enough to sweep everything away, but the current had teeth. Noah tied a rope around his waist. Amelia stepped forward. What do you need? His first instinct was to refuse her. She saw it clearly. Pride, distrust, protective anger, all of it flashed across his face. Then lightning split the sky, illuminating the trapped teenagers clinging to the stairs. Noah swallowed whatever argument he had prepared. Keep the line organized. No one pulls unless I signal. If the current shifts, you get everyone back. You trust me with that? His eyes met hers through the rain. I trust that you don't want anyone to die. It was not tenderness. It was not forgiveness. But it was something solid enough to stand on. Amelia nodded. Noah went into the water. The next 20 minutes stretched into something both endless and brutally fast. Amelia shouted until her throat burned. She gripped wet rope with both hands, feeling the fibers cut into her palms. Beside her, fishermen, shopkeepers, hotel staff, and teenagers pulled when she gave the count. No one asked whether she belonged. No one cared that she had arrived in designer clothes and intended to buy half their horizon. In danger, people measured one another differently. Noah reached the stair, secured the first teenager, and sent him across with a second line. The boy stumbled into the waiting arms of volunteers, coughing, sobbing, alive. The second followed. Then the old woman, wrapped in a life vest too large for her, her grey hair plastered against her face. When she touched dry ground, she clutched Amelia's hand without knowing whose hand it was. Bless you, she whispered. Amelia could not answer. The old man refused to leave until Noah practically carried him. By then the storm had worsened. A call came over one of the radios. Lights seen near the lighthouse. Someone might be inside. Everyone turned toward the end of the pier. The Maple Harbor lighthouse had not worked in years. It stood beyond the old stone walk, white paint peeled by salt and age, its base often flooded in bad weather. Tonight, water churned around it like a living thing. No, Lily said from behind Amelia. Nobody should be out there. Noah was already looking toward it. Amelia grabbed his arm. For 1 second, her hand closed around wet flannel and warm muscle, and he looked down as if that touch had startled him more than storm. You can't go alone, she said. I'm not asking permission. I'm telling you the truth. His face hardened. Stay here. But Amelia saw what he did not, a flash in the lighthouse window, not lightning, a flashlight, weak, frantic, human. She had spent a lifetime making decisions in seconds while men waited for certainty. She knew when waiting became cowardice. I have a better light, she said, reaching for the emergency pack one of her drivers had brought. And you know the path. So either argue and waste time, or move. Noah stared at her, rain running down his face. Then he cursed under his breath and handed her the end of a rope. Stay behind me. Step where I step. If I say stop, you stop, understood? They moved onto the stone path together. The walk to the lighthouse was only a few hundred feet, but in the storm it became a crossing between worlds. Waves broke over the stones, striking their knees. Twice Amelia slipped, and twice Noah's hand caught her before she fell. His grip was rough, immediate, unthinking, not the touch of a man trying to impress her, the touch of someone who would not let go because letting go meant loss. At the lighthouse door, Noah shoved his shoulder against swollen wood until it gave. Inside, the lower chamber was flooded ankle deep. The air smelled of rust, salt, and old secrets. Hello? Noah shouted. A whimper answered from above. They found a young girl from the tourist cottages on the second landing, soaked and terrified. with a scraped knee and a dead flashlight. She had run in during the storm after chasing her little brother's dog. Then the water rose and the door stuck. Noah crouched before her, voice gentler than Amelia had ever heard it. "Hey, Emma, your mom's looking for you. We're going to get you home." The girl cried harder. Amelia removed her rain jacket and wrapped it around the child's shoulders. Emma stared at her with wide eyes. "You're the lady buying the harbor," she whispered. Amelia's throat tightened. "Not tonight," she said softly. "Tonight, I'm just the lady with the dry jacket." Noah looked at her then, and something unguarded passed between them. Not affection, not yet, but recognition. A small lamp lit in a ruined room. As Noah prepared to carry Emma down, Amelia turned to retrieve the emergency pack. Her foot struck something beneath the water near the curved wall. Metal scraped stone. She frowned and bent, plunging her hand into the cold floodwater. Her fingers closed around a handle. It was a small metal box, wedged behind a loosened panel at the base of the old supply cabinet. Rust had eaten at its corners, but the latch held. Something about it felt deliberate, hidden, not lost. "Amelia," Noah called from the stairs. "We need to move." "I found something, leave it." She should have. The storm was still raging. A frightened child waited. The sea pushed against the lighthouse walls like a warning. But then lightning flashed through the narrow window, and she saw, etched faintly into the lid beneath the rust, 2 letters, E.W. Her heart stopped. With shaking hands, Amelia forced the latch open. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth and miraculously dry, lay a bundle of letters tied with faded blue ribbon. The handwriting on the top envelope was graceful, slanted, painfully familiar from birthday cards, signed by a woman who had never known how to say, "I love you" aloud. Amelia did not breathe as she lifted the first letter. It was addressed in her mother's hand. To Thomas Reed, for one suspended second, the storm seemed to fall silent around Amelia. The lighthouse still groaned. Rain still struck the glass, in hard silver lines, and voice on below, the rescued boy was crying softly against Noah's coat. And the sea kept throwing itself at the rocks with the old fury of something denied entry for too long. Yet all Amelia could hear was the blood moving in her ears and the faint, impossible whisper of her mother's name written across time, to Thomas Reed, not to a lawyer, not to an official, not to her father, to Noah's grandfather. Noah reached her side at last, soaked through, his hair dark against his forehead, one arm still braced against the wall, as the lighthouse trembled under another gust. He looked first at Amelia's face, then at the letter in her hands. His expression changed before he understood why. Anger, impatience, concern. Everything narrowed into a wary stillness. "What is that?" Amelia tried to answer, but her throat had closed. She turned the envelope toward him. Noah read the name, and the color left his face. For all their battles, the town hall arguments, the accusations flung across rain-slick docks, the way he had looked at her, as if she were a storm in a silk coat. Amelia had never seen him look afraid, not even when the sea was rising around them, not even when he had climbed the lighthouse stairs with a child on his back. But now, staring at his grandfather's name in Amelia Hart's handwriting, Noah looked like a man standing at the edge of a grave that had just spoken. "We have to go," he said, but his voice had changed. It had gone rough, too careful. Amelia pressed the bundle against her chest. "I'm not leaving them." "I didn't say leave them." His gaze flickered toward the stairs. "I said go. Before this whole place decides to come down with us inside it." That practical sentence, so steady, so Noah, pulled her back into her body. She wrapped the oilcloth around the letters again, tucked the metal box under one arm, and followed him down. The storm had turned Maple Harbor into a blurred watercolor of lamplight and water. By the time they reached May Reed's house, the boy had been returned to his frantic mother at the rescue shelter, passed from Noah's arms into sobbing relief. People clapped him on the shoulder. Someone wrapped Amelia in a wool blanket, without asking who she was. For once, no one spoke to her as the woman trying to buy their waterfront. They spoke to her as someone cold and wet who needed tea. May's small kitchen glowed amber against the storm. It smelled of boiled ginger, old wood, and the faint salt that lived permanently in coastal houses. The windows rattled, but the room itself seemed rooted deeper than weather. May moved with quiet urgency, setting towels on chairs, turning on the kettle, placing a chipped plate of biscuits in the center of the table, as if food could steady history before it broke open. Noah stood near the sink, arms folded, watching the metal box on the table as though it might accuse him. Amelia sat across from it, her damp hair falling over one shoulder, her fingers numb around a mug she had not tasted. She had faced acquisition wars, hostile boards, courtroom ambushes, reporters who wanted blood behind every headline. She knew how to be composed beneath attack, but she did not know how to open her dead mother's secret life in front of the grandson of the man it had been written to. May lowered herself into the chair at the head of the table. For a long moment she did not touch the letters. Her eyes rested on the blue ribbon, and something old moved across her face. Not surprise, not exactly recognition, Amelia noticed. So did Noah, May, he said softly. The old woman exhaled. I wondered if the sea would keep them forever. Noah straightened. You knew. I knew there were letters. May's hands trembled only once before she folded them neatly in her lap. I didn't know where Thomas hid them. Amelia's heart gave a painful, disbelieving beat. You knew my mother wrote to him. May looked at her then, really looked. Not at her coat or her name, or the wealth that followed her like a shadow. She looked at Amelia's face as if searching for another woman beneath it. You have Eleanor's eyes, she said. No one had ever told Amelia that in a way that sounded tender. Her father had said it once. After a charity gala, with a glass of whiskey in his hand and bitterness in his mouth. You have your mother's eyes when you judge me. Amelia had spent years making sure those eyes revealed nothing. Now they burned. Noah reached for the ribbon, then stopped. Should we? It was a strange question, and stranger still that he was asking her permission. The letters bore his grandfather's name. They bore her mother's hand. Somehow they belonged to both of them and neither of them. They were inheritance, evidence, confession. Amelia untied the ribbon. The first sheet unfolded with a dry, delicate whisper. My dearest Thomas. She read silently at first, and the words blurred. She blinked hard, then forced herself to continue aloud because if she kept them inside her chest, she thought they might tear her open. I went to the courthouse today. The transfer records are altered. 3 parcels that still belong to the fishing families have been marked as abandoned. You were right. Caldwell's office is moving faster than we feared. Noah's jaw tightened. Evelyn's father, I said. Back then, Harold Caldwell. Amelia read on. Eleanor's voice emerged line by line. Not the distant woman in pearls Amelia remembered from silent breakfasts. Not the elegant figure who smelled faintly of jasmine and sadness, but a young woman fierce with purpose. She wrote of a developer from the city promising jobs and harbor renewal. She wrote of families pressured to sign papers they did not understand. She wrote of Thomas Reed, who had gathered fishermen in the church basement and taught them which clauses stole their homes. She wrote of fear, of threats, of men arriving at night to break nets and smash windows. And beneath the urgency, woven through it like a hidden flame, she wrote of love. I am less afraid when you stand beside me. Noah looked away when Amelia reached that line. Perhaps out of respect, perhaps because he could not bear to see his grandfather young and loved. Amelia understood. She could barely bear to see her mother that way. The second letter deepened the wound. Eleanor had found proof that the land deal was fraudulent. She had copied ledgers, traced payments through shell companies, and hidden documents at the lighthouse until they could take them to the state attorney. She had believed her own family name might protect them long enough to expose the truth. Then came the scandal. The newspaper had accused Eleanor of betraying Maple Harbor, of selling confidential records to developers in exchange for money. Thomas had been painted as a bitter local who invented lies after losing her affection. A photograph had appeared, Eleanor leaving the developer's office after dark, cropped to erase the ledger clutched in her hand. Amelia stopped reading. The kitchen clock ticked. Rain tapped softer now, no longer violent but persistent, like fingers against a locked door. My mother was accused of taking money, Amelia said. May nodded slowly. People believed it or wanted to. It was easier to blame a rich girl than admit the mayor's office had sold them out. Noah's voice was low. My grandfather never spoke of her, not once. My father said. Thomas carried shame like a second spine. He carried silence, May corrected. There's a difference. Amelia picked up another letter, but her hands were shaking so badly the page quivered. Noah noticed. Without a word, he reached across the table and steadied the corner of the paper with 2 fingers. He did not take it from her. He did not tell her to stop. He simply shared the trembling. It was such a small mercy that Amelia nearly came undone. She had spent her whole life surrounded by people who handled her pain as a liability. Her father looked away from it. Her employees hid from it. Victor managed it into schedules and statements, smoothing the edges until grief became an item on an agenda. But Noah, who had every reason to despise her, sat in his grandmother's kitchen and held one corner of her mother's letter so Amelia could keep reading. The final letter was not dated. Thomas, if this reaches you, it means I failed to meet you at the lighthouse. Richard says leaving town is the only way to protect what remains of my family name. But I know now that names are weak shields. They protect houses, not hearts. Amelia's breath caught at her father's name. I did not betray you. I did not betray them. Someone placed money in an account under my name. Someone sent the photograph to the paper. Someone took the copies I made from the courthouse file. I am afraid the original records will disappear next. Noah's eyes lifted to hers. The old bitterness between them flickered, still present but no longer simple. He had thought she was another heart, coming to take what remained. She had thought he was a stubborn local, romanticizing decay. But the letters sat between them, patient and devastating, proving that long before either of them learned to fight, their families had been wounded by the same hand. Amelia read the last lines barely above a whisper. If they make me a villain, remember me as I was when I stood beside you on the harbor wall, with wind in my hair and ink on my fingers, believing we could save something worth saving. And if one day anyone asks, tell them the truth was not lost. It was buried by those who feared it. The paper lowered. No one spoke for a while. Outside, the storm began to move east, leaving Maple Harbor dripping and bruised beneath the night. Somewhere in the distance, a bell rang once from the harbor buoy, lonely and clear. Noah rubbed a hand over his face. All my life I thought the hearts were part of what ruined him. Amelia looked down at her mother's handwriting. All my life, I thought my mother was cold because she didn't love enough. Her voice broke despite her best effort. Maybe she was cold because everyone who knew the warm version of her was taken away. May reached across and covered Amelia's hand with her thin, work-worn fingers. Your mother came back once, Amelia froze. What? Years later, after you were born. She stood outside this house in a cream coat, holding a little girl's red mitten. May's eyes softened. She didn't knock. Thomas saw her from the workshop window. By the time he reached the road, she was gone. A little girl's red mitten. Amelia remembered one from an old photograph, herself at 4 scowling in a wool hat, one mitten missing. Her mother had cried that day, not loudly, not in a way anyone would call grief. Just one tear sliding down a flawless face, while she stared out toward a road Amelia did not know. The memory struck her with such force that she stood too quickly, the chair scraping back. Noah rose as well. Amelia. She turned away from the table, pressing her fingers to her mouth. There was too much to hold. Her mother's stolen honor, Thomas Reed's silence, Maple Harbor's anger, her own arrival with contracts and glossy renderings, walking straight into an old wound, wearing the face of the people who had profited from it. "I came here to buy land," she said, not looking at him. "I sat in that town hall and told people change was inevitable, as if I had invented the future." A bitter laugh escaped her, almost soundless. "And all this time my family may have been standing on a lie." Noah did not rush to comfort her. That would have been too easy. And he was not a man who offered cheap absolution. He came to stand near her, close enough that she could feel his warmth after the cold storm, far enough that she could choose whether to turn. "My family built its pride on the other side of that lie," he said. "Maybe we've both inherited things we didn't understand." She looked at him then. His eyes were tired, dark with everything the night had dragged up, but there was no triumph in them, no satisfaction that the billionaire had been humbled, only a grief that recognized hers. For the first time, Amelia did not see him as an obstacle between her and a project. She saw the boy he must have been, learning to hammer nails beside a grandfather who never explained why some silences hurt more than shouting. She saw the man he had become, defending a harbor without knowing that his fight was older than his own anger. And perhaps Noah saw something in her too, not Heartstone properties, not the woman in headlines, but a daughter holding proof that her mother had once loved, fought, and been destroyed for it. "We need the records," Amelia said. Noah nodded. "Courthouse archives, old property transfers, newspaper negatives if they still exist, bank accounts," she added. The CEO in her returning armor but as instrument, shell companies, payment trails if someone framed her, money moved somewhere. May's gaze sharpened. "Be careful. Truth that stayed buried this long usually has someone guarding the grave." Amelia thought of Mayor Caldwell's smooth smile, of Victor's constant insistence that the town's resistance was emotional noise, of missing files and conveniently expedited permits. A chill moved through her that had nothing to do with rain. Noah picked up the metal box and closed it gently. "Then we don't let them know what we found." Their eyes met over the letters. A fragile alliance formed there, not declared, not romantic in any simple way, but intimate because it had roots in grief. Amelia felt it settle between them with terrifying quiet. Trust was still far away, forgiveness even farther, but for the first time they stood on the same side of a question. Who had buried the truth, and who was still afraid of it being found? Across town, long after Maple Harbor's windows went dark and the last storm siren fell silent, a black sedan rolled behind the municipal building with its headlights off. Victor Lang stepped out beneath the dripping eaves, immaculate even at midnight, his overcoat unmarked by the rain as if weather knew better than to touch him. Mayor Evelyn Caldwell was waiting by the rear entrance, arms crossed tightly, her face pale in the security light. "You said the lighthouse was searched years ago." Victor said it was. Not well enough. His voice was quiet, but the softness made it colder. Amelia was there tonight, with Noah Reed. The mayor's expression flickered. "Do they have anything?" Victor looked toward the darkened archive wing of the municipal building, where decades of deeds, permits, and court filings slept in metal cabinets no one had bothered to modernize. "We assume they do," he said, "and we make sure they find nothing else." Caldwell swallowed. "Those records are public." Victor turned to her then, his eyes flat and polished as black glass. "Then lose them publicly. Flood damage, mold, clerical transfer. I don't care what story you use." Rainwater slid from the roof between them, striking the pavement like a ticking clock. "Destroy every remaining file tied to the old Harborland case," Victor ordered, before Amelia Hart learns her mother wasn't the only one betrayed. By morning the rain had passed, leaving Maple Harbor washed clean in a way that felt almost unfair. The streets shone silver beneath a pale sun. Fishing nets hung from railings like tired lace outside the bakery. Mrs. Alvarez propped open her blue door, letting out the smell of butter and cinnamon, as if the town had not spent the last week arguing about land deeds, broken families, and the arrival of a woman whose name could move markets before breakfast. Amelia stood at the window of her rented suite above the old inn, watching gulls wheel over the harbour. On the small desk behind her lay the tin box from the lighthouse, its edges rusted, its contents still impossible. Eleanor Hart's handwriting had looked nothing like Amelia expected. She had imagined her mother's words would be elegant, controlled, faintly cold. The way Eleanor herself had seemed in Amelia's memory, beautiful and distant, always stepping out of rooms before any tenderness could become real. But the letters had been uneven in places, rushed in others. There had been fear in the slant of the ink. Hope, too. And Thomas Reed's name. Noah's grandfather, the world Amelia had built herself upon, had always been made of steel, glass, contracts, and numbers that did not tremble. Yet overnight something beneath it had shifted, not collapsed. She would have known what to do with collapse. No, this was worse. It had softened. Her phone had been ringing since dawn. Victor, the board chair, legal. Victor again. She had ignored them until 6:45. Then answered with the calm voice that had made competitors underestimate her right before she took their companies apart. "We need a full board call at 9, she said. Victor's silence lasted half a second too long. To discuss the acquisition timeline, to discuss a revised development model. Another silence. Then his voice arrived, smooth and careful. "Amelia, if this is about last night, it's about Maple Harbor. That," he said, "is exactly what concerns me." At 9, the faces of the Heartstone Properties Board filled the large screen in the conference room Amelia had borrowed from the inn's owner. The room smelled faintly of coffee and sea salt. It was not the kind of room in which billion-dollar decisions were usually made. The projector flickered twice. One of the blinds was crooked. Somewhere below, a child laughed in the street. Amelia did not apologize for any of it. She stood at the head of the table in a cream blouse and dark trousers, hair pinned back, eyes clear despite the sleepless night. Beside her laptop lay a stack of revised renderings. Not the sleek resort towers approved months ago in Manhattan, with private villas swallowing the waterfront and a members-only marina cutting through the working docks. These drawings were different. Lower buildings, public shoreline access, preservation of the lighthouse, a cooperative market hall for local shops, restores fishermen's docks funded by Heartstone but owned by the town trust, a boutique inn instead of a luxury hotel chain, profit-sharing leases for long-term residents, a historical center built around Maple Harbor's maritime past. It was still ambitious, still expensive, still profitable if one had patience. It was also the first project Amelia had ever proposed that did not begin with acquisition as conquest. When she finished, no one spoke. Then board member Charles Whitcomb let out a short laugh, the kind old money men used when a woman had become inconveniently serious. "You want us to give away the waterfront?" "No," Amelia said. "I want us to build without erasing the reason people come here." Victor appeared on screen from the New York office, sitting beneath a wall of framed awards Amelia had won and rarely looked at. He leaned forward slowly, his expression arranged into concern. "What you're describing is not development," he said. "It's charity with a better font. It's a long-term mixed community investment. It's financial suicide." Amelia's fingers rested lightly on the table. She could hear the boats outside knocking against the pier, a soft, hollow rhythm like a second heartbeat. "Our current plan guarantees organized resistance, litigational delays, reputational damage, and possible historical preservation intervention. This revision reduces risk." Victor smiled faintly. Compassion dressed up as strategy. "That's new for you." For a moment, the room went very still. Once, that remark might have angered her because it questioned her competence. Now it struck somewhere deeper, not because it was cruel, but because there was a time when he had been right. Compassion had been a word she allowed other people to use, after she had already won. She looked at him through the screen. Then perhaps it was overdue. Several board members shifted. One asked about margins. Another demanded revised forecasts. A third warned that investors would interpret any concession as weakness. Victor pressed hardest, circling every answer she gave. If you bend here, he said, every town from Maine to California will expect sentiment to outweigh contracts. Not sentiment, Amelia replied. Memory labor existing value. Existing value does not pay dividends. It does if you know how to protect it. His face changed then, just slightly. The polish remained, but underneath it something sharpened. You're making this personal. Amelia thought of her mother's letters, of a young Eleanor who had once stood somewhere in this town and believed truth could survive power, of Richard Hart's silence, of Thomas Reed's ruined name, of Noah in the lighthouse holding history like it might cut him. Yes, she said softly. I am. The call ended without approval. It did not end in defeat either. That afternoon, Amelia presented the revised plan at the community hall. She had expected anger, and Maple Harbor did not disappoint her. The hall was crowded with folded arms, suspicious faces, neighbors whispering against neighbors. Some people wanted the money. Some wanted everything preserved exactly as it had been, even the parts that were already failing. Some simply distrusted the fact that Amelia Hart, who had arrived with lawyers and purchase options, now spoke of stewardship. Noel stood near the back, not beside her, not exactly against her. That distance mattered. It said he would not lend her his credibility cheaply. It also said he had come. Lily sat with May Reed in the second row, her face pale with worry. The secret agreement she had signed still hung between her and her brother like a bruise, no one touched in public. But when Amelia unfolded the new drawings, Lily leaned forward despite herself. Amelia spoke for 20 minutes, not with the icy precision of a CEO conquering a room, but with something quieter and more dangerous because it was honest. I came here thinking land was an asset, she said. I still believe it is. But I was wrong about what kind. The waterfront is not valuable, only because of what can be built over it. It is valuable because of what has already been lived there. A murmur moved through the hall. Old Mr. Bell, whose bait shop sat crookedly between two newer storefronts, stood up and said, Pretty words don't keep rent from doubling. No, Amelia answered. Contracts do. That is why the proposal includes caps for existing local tenants and a community ownership stake. Someone else called, and when your board refuses, her gaze flicked briefly to Noah. Then I fight my board. The room did not soften all at once. Real distrust rarely gave itself up in dramatic moments. It loosened reluctantly, like a knot in salt-stiff rope afterward. People surrounded the renderings. Some pointed with suspicion. Others argued misses. Alvarez asked whether the market hall would allow her niece to rent a stall seasonally. A fisherman named Dale wanted everything in writing. May said nothing for a long time, then touched the drawing of the restored lighthouse with 2 fingers. You kept the lantern room, she said. Amelia nodded. It should remain visible from the water. May looked at her then, old eyes bright with things she had not yet chosen to say. Your mother thought so too. The words passed through Amelia quietly and stayed. Founders' Day arrived 2 days later beneath a sky so blue it seemed staged for forgiveness. Maple Harbor dressed itself in bunting and stubborn hope. Children chased each other between booths. The high school band played slightly out of tune near the gazebo, brass notes wobbling bravely into the afternoon. Someone had hung paper lanterns from the trees lining the green. The dock smelled of salt, fried clams, diesel and sugar. Amelia had attended galas where orchids were, flown in from 3 countries, and champagne towers reflected chandeliers taller than houses. She had stood beside ministers, heirs, actors, and men who wore philanthropy like cufflinks. None of it had ever prepared her for the terrifying intimacy of being handed a paper plate by Mrs. Alvarez, piled high with food made by hands that had also kneaded dough at 4 that morning. "Eat before you negotiate anything else," the woman ordered. Amelia glanced down at the plate. "Is that a business strategy?" "It's town strategy." No, appearing beside her with 2 cups of lemonade, said, "Very effective. We've survived hurricanes on casserole alone." She looked at him, surprised by the ease of his voice. Not trust, not yet, but ease was its own small miracle. He handed her a cup. Their fingers brushed. It should not have mattered. Amelia had shaken hands with presidents, accepted awards, signed documents that changed skylines. Yet the brief warmth of Noah's fingers unsettled her more than any of it. They walked along the edge of the festival together, not quite touching. People noticed. Some watched with narrowed eyes. Some pretended not to. A few nodded at Noah and ignored Amelia completely. He did not apologize for them, and she was grateful. Pity would have made her retreat. Silence let her stay. At the pie booth, Lily forced Noah to buy 3 slices for community morale, then gave Amelia the largest one with a defiant little lift of her chin. "I'm not saying I trust you," Lily said. "I didn't assume you did. But the dock plan." Lily looked away toward the harbor. "It would help. If it's real, it's real." Noah studied Amelia over the rim of his cup. There was still caution in him, deeply rooted, grown from years of watching outsiders make promises with one hand and take with the other. But something had changed since the lighthouse. He looked at her now, as if she was no longer just the threat arriving from the city. As if she might be a person standing inside a storm, not entirely of her own making. Near sunset, the band began an old coastal song everyone seemed to know except Amelia. The melody drifted unevenly over the green. Couples swayed. Children spun in circles. May sat wrapped in a blue shawl, watching the harbor as if counting ghosts. Amelia stood beside Noah beneath the paper lanterns. "I don't know how to belong here," she admitted, the words so quiet they almost disappeared beneath the music. Noah did not answer immediately. He was looking toward the docks, where men were tying colored flags to boats for the evening procession. "Most people don't," he said at last. "They just keep showing up until one day someone saves them a seat." The simplicity of it hurt. All her life, Amelia had earned rooms, bought tables, commanded attention. No one had ever described belonging as something as ordinary as a saved seat. A laugh rose nearby, as Mrs. Alvarez scolded the mayor for judging the chowder contest too quickly. Evelyn Caldwell smiled for the crowd, but Amelia noticed how the mayor's eyes slid toward her and then away. Too fast, too carefully. A faint unease moved through Amelia, but Noah's shoulder was close to hers, warm through the cooling evening, and for once she allowed herself not to chase every shadow. Fireworks began over the harbor at 9. Gold burst above the water, scattering light over the roofs. The lighthouse, the faces turned upward. Amelia watched, the reflections tremble in the dark waves, and felt something inside her loosen with frightening tenderness. She did not own this town, she did not control it, and somehow, for the first time in years, she wanted not to possess a place but to be allowed to care for it. Beside her, Noah said, "You surprised people this week. Did I surprise you?" He looked down at her. In the flicker of fireworks, his face seemed younger, stripped of anger but not of pain. "Yes," he said. "But I think maybe you surprised yourself more." She smiled faintly. "That sounds inconvenient. It usually is." For one suspended moment, the noise, suspicion, board threats, old letters, and unfinished betrayals fell away. There was only the harbor wind, the fading sparks, and Noah Reed standing beside her. Not in surrender, not in opposition, but in possibility. Then Amelia's phone began to vibrate once, twice, again and again. Around them, other phones lit up too. At first she thought it was some festival message, a weather alert, a photo being shared. Then the music seemed to thin, Laughter dropped strangely. A teenage boy near the lemonade stand looked from his screen to Amelia with open disgust. Mrs. Alvarez covered her mouth. Dale, the fisherman, swore under his breath. Noah's phone buzzed in his hand. He looked at the screen. The warmth in his expression vanished. "What is it?" Amelia asked. He did not answer. So she took out her own phone. The video had already been shared hundreds of times, then thousands. The image was blurred, clearly recorded from somewhere nearby, perhaps through a window, perhaps from a hallway. Amelia's voice played over it, clipped and sharp. "These people don't understand value." A pause. "They'll take whatever we give them if we dress it up as respect." Another cut, so seamless at first that only someone trained in negotiations might hear the shift. "Small towns are sentimental, that makes them easy." Her blood went cold. The words were hers and not hers. Pieces stolen from different conversations, rearranged, stripped of context, sharpened in contempt, a fabrication made from fragments of truth. Enough of her voice to convince the wounded, enough arrogance to match what many already feared she believed. Around the green, people began turning toward her. Not all at once, that would have been kinder. It happened in ripples. Confusion first, then recognition, then betrayal igniting in faces that had only just begun to open. Mrs. Alvarez set down the tray she was holding. Lily stared as if Amelia had slapped her. May closed her eyes. Noah's jaw tightened and the phone remained his hand like evidence. "No," Amelia whispered. "It's edited." But her voice sounded small against the rising murmur. Someone shouted, "We knew it." Voice angrier, closer. "You stood in our hall and lied to our faces." The fireworks continued overhead, absurdly beautiful, gold falling into black water. Amelia looked at Noah, searching for the cautious hope that had stood beside her only moments ago. He did not step away, but he did not step toward her either, and by midnight, the recording was everywhere. By morning, Maple Harbor had turned its doors, its windows, and its wounded heart against Amelia Hart. By sunrise, Maple Harbor no longer sounded like a town waking up. It sounded like a town holding its breath before a storm. The gulls still cried over the harbor, the fishing boats still knocked softly against their moorings, and the bakery on Harbor Lane still opened at 6 with warm light spilling over the sidewalk. But beneath those ordinary sounds, something had changed. Doors closed a little harder. Conversations stopped when Amelia's Blacktown car rolled past. Curtains shifted and fell still. The recording had done what no legal notice, no town hall argument, no glossy development brochure had managed to do. It had made Amelia Hart look exactly like the villain Maple Harbor had been waiting for. At 8 in the morning, she arrived at the temporary Heartstone office on Bay Street and found the front window shattered. For a moment she did not move. Tiny cubes of safety glass glittered across the wooden floor like spilled ice. The sea wind pushed through the broken pane, fluttering the blueprints pinned to the wall. Someone had thrown a brick through the window. It lay near the reception desk, wrapped in a sheet of copy paper that had been fastened with twine. "Go back to your towers." The words had been written in black marker, uneven and angry. Her assistant from Boston, Mara, stood near the door with one hand over her mouth. 2 local contractors who had agreed, quietly and cautiously, to discuss restoration work for the proposed community market were no longer there. Their chairs were empty. One had left a voicemail at dawn, voice stiff with embarrassment, saying his wife thought it best if they waited until things settled. The other had not called at all. Amelia bent down and picked up the brick. It was heavier than it looked, a silly thought, but it came with strange clarity. Violence always looked smaller from a distance. A rock on a pavement, a bruise under makeup, a rumor in a boardroom. A mother's name whispered behind closed doors. From far away, damage could be mistaken for inconvenience. Up close, it had weight. "Should I call the police?" Mara asked. Amelia stared at the paper wrapped around the brick. Then she folded it once, twice, and placed it on the desk. "Yes," she said. Her voice was calm enough to belong to someone else. "And call Boston. I want security on the building by noon." Mara looked at her carefully. "Are you all right?" Amelia gave a small smile, the kind she used in shareholder meetings when men twice her age tried to test her with condescension. "I've had worse mornings." It was not true, or perhaps it was. She could no longer tell the difference between pain and familiarity. By 9, the police had come and gone, asking questions with the helpless politeness of people who knew very well what anger had done, but not how to arrest a whole town for feeling betrayed. By 10, 3 more residents withdrew from scheduled meetings. By 11, Mrs. Alvarez returned the envelope. Amelia had left with a donation pledge for the after-school kitchen, unopened. She did not come inside. She stood outside the broken window, her grey cardigan buttoned wrong, her face tired in a way that made Amelia's chest ache. "I can't take this now," Mrs. Alvarez said. Amelia stepped carefully over the glass. The children need to know their home is not for sale to someone who laughs at them behind doors. The words were not shouted. That made them worse. Amelia's fingers tightened at her side. For one foolish second, she wanted to say what the polished Amelia Hart would never say. "I did not laugh. I have been lonely my entire life. I stood under your festival lights last night and thought, maybe I had found a place where I could breathe." Instead, she looked at the envelope and nodded. "I understand." Mrs. Alvarez's mouth trembled, perhaps with anger, perhaps with disappointment. "I don't think you do." After she left, Amelia stood by the broken window until the cold ocean air made her eyes water. Across the street, 2 teenagers stopped to take a picture of the damage. One of them noticed her watching and lowered the phone, shame flashing briefly across his face. Before defiance covered it, they hurried away. By noon, Heartstone Properties released an official statement denying the authenticity of the recording and condemning the vandalism. It was clean, legal, bloodless. It had Victor Lang's fingerprints, even though he was, according to his email, deeply concerned and available to assist in crisis management. Amelia read the draft on her phone and almost laughed. Deeply concerned. That was how betrayal dressed itself in corporate language, she called him. Victor answered on the second ring. "Amelia, I assume you've seen the media pickup." "Who made the recording?" A pause. Small. Almost elegant. "I'm sorry." Don't his sigh was smooth. "You're under enormous pressure. I suggest you avoid making accusations you can't support." Outside, a woman walking her dog crossed to the other side of the street rather than pass Amelia's office. Amelia watched her go. "You always preferred indirect weapons," she said. "Leaks, delays, anonymous board concerns, edited files." Victor's voice cooled. "Careful. The board is already asking whether your personal entanglement with a local carpenter compromised." There it was. Not just the town, not just the land. No, Victor had aimed for the only place she had not fortified. "Enjoy your morning, Victor," Amelia said, and ended the call before he could hear her breath shake. She did not cry. Tears in her family had always been treated like mismanaged assets. Private, inconvenient, best hidden before anyone could assign blame. Her father had taught her silence by example. Her mother had taught it by absence. And Amelia, dutiful daughter of an empire built on polished stone and buried grief, had learned too well. So when Noah came in that afternoon, stepping over the remaining glass with his boots leaving faint damp marks on the floor, Amelia was standing at the long table in a cream coat, reviewing revised financial models, not pacing, not pleading, not breaking. Exactly as people expected a billionaire to stand in a ruined office. His eyes went first to the window, then to the brick on the desk, then to her face. For a moment, something raw moved through him. Concern. She saw it before he buried it. "You should have boarded this up," he said. "Security is handling it." Security, he repeated, almost bitterly. The word hung between them. In Maple Harbor, security was a neighbor checking on your porch light. For Amelia, it was hired men in black jackets, cameras, protocols, distance. She set down her pen. Did you come to inspect the damage? His jaw flexed. He looked as though he had slept badly, if he had slept at all. The festival warmth was gone from him, replaced by something harder and more wounded. His hair was wind-tossed, his knuckles scraped, his eyes filled with the dangerous exhaustion of a man trying not to believe what fear was whispering. I came to ask you directly, he said. Then ask. Was any part of it true? The question landed softer than an accusation, and that was what made it unbearable. Amelia felt something inside her go very still. Any part, not did you say it, not was it fabricated, not who did this to you. Was any part of it true? Because some part of him had already searched the recording for traces of the woman he had feared she might be. The woman who could stand beside him under fireworks, hold his history in both hands, then return to a conference call and reduce his town to leverage. She lifted her chin. If you're asking whether I used cold language in private business meetings before I understood this town, yes, I have. Noah's eyes darkened. If you're asking whether I said those words in that order with that meaning, no, but you did say pieces of them. Amelia's mouth curved faintly, without humor. Welcome to the art of destroying someone. Use enough truth to make the lie feel righteous. He looked away. The movement was small, devastating. She wanted him to fight for her. That realization shamed her more than the broken window, more than the recording, more than the town's anger. She wanted Noah Reed, who owed her nothing, to step across the glass and say he knew her. Not the CEO, not Amelia Hart's daughter, not the woman who came to buy the waterfront. Her. Instead, he stood on the other side of doubt. I told people to give you a chance, he said quietly. I stood in front of them and said maybe you were listening. And now you're embarrassed. His gaze snapped back. That's not fair. No fair would be asking why the file appeared. The night Mayor Caldwell lost control of the room. Fair would be asking who benefits if I'm isolated from the town and pressured by my board. Fair would be believing I have enough intelligence not to sabotage myself with a recording that conveniently confirms every fear people already had. I'm not stupid, Amelia. I didn't say you were. You're talking like I'm one of your executives because if she talked to him like the man who had brushed sawdust from his sleeve before touching her hand, she might not survive the answer. The wind came through the broken window, lifting one corner of the plans for the waterfront. The paper whispered against the table. No, stepped closer. I need to know if what happened between us was real, or if I was just another way for you to get inside Maple Harbor. There the knife finally named. Amelia's fingers rested on the edge of the table beneath her calm. Her pulse beat so hard it seemed to hurt her bones. All her life, love had come with conditions attached. Be brilliant, and her father would approve. Be composed, and the world would respect her. Be useful and people would stay. The moment she failed, affection became evaluation. Warmth became evidence. Trust became a contract with invisible clauses. And now Noah, with his honest hands and wounded pride, was asking her to prove that her heart had not been strategy. She could have told him about the night. She had gone back to her rental and sat on the kitchen floor because his grandmother's stories had made her miss a mother she never truly had. She could have told him that the sight of him repairing the community hall, steps in the rain, had undone something in her. She could have confessed that when he looked at her, she felt less like a woman performing competence and more like someone who might be allowed to be tired. Instead, armor rose where tenderness should have been. If that is what you believe, she said, nothing I say will convince you otherwise. Pain crossed his face. You're not even going to try. Her laugh was barely audible. I have spent my entire life trying. No. Trying to be credible, trying to be untouchable, trying to prove I deserve rooms that were built to exclude me. I won't stand here and beg for a verdict from someone who has already put me on trial." His shoulders stiffened. "And I won't be used," he said. "No," she replied, voice softening despite herself. "You won't." For one fragile second, they simply looked at each other. Two people standing in the wreckage of a trust that had not yet had time to grow strong roots. Outside, Maple Harbor moved around them, hurt and listening, while inside, the sea wind touched the broken glass with a delicate, chiming sound. Then Noah turned and left. Amelia watched him go without calling his name. Only when his truck engine faded down Bay Street did she reach for the table. Her hand found the corner, gripped it once, then released. Upstairs, in the small apartment above the office, Lily Reed sat on the floor with her laptop open, and her phone face down beside her like a dangerous animal. She had not meant to become involved. That was what she kept telling herself as she replayed the audio file for the 9th time. Headphones pressed tightly over her ears. She had downloaded it from one of the local message threads before the original post disappeared and was replaced by cleaner copies. At first, she had listened because anger demanded company. She wanted to hear Amelia's guilt clearly, wanted to feel justified for the shame burning in her chest. But Lily had spent 2 years editing short videos for the inn's website, cutting wedding speeches, fixing wind distortion, smoothing awkward pauses in tourist interviews. Not professional, perhaps, but enough to notice when sound breathed wrong. There was a break beneath one sentence, a half click under Amelia's voice, room tone that shifted for less than a second, the faint change of compression around the word sentimental. Lily played it again, her stomach turned. "Oh no," she whispered. She opened the audio software she still used for freelance work and pulled the waveform wider. The evidence was not dramatic. It would not leap out to anyone wanting certainty. But it was there, unnatural cuts, patched silence, fragments lifted from different recordings and fused into one brutal sentence. Amelia had been framed. Lily covered her mouth. Then her phone lit up. Unknown number. She did not answer. A message appeared. "Remember your loan agreement. If your brother learns you signed before the vote, he'll know who really betrayed the town first." Another message followed. "Stay quiet, Lily, for your family's sake." She stared at the screen until the letters blurred. Victor Lang had cornered her once outside the bank with his city smile and soft voice, telling her she was practical, brave, misunderstood. He had known exactly where to press. The inn's overdue taxes, May's medical bills, Noah's stubborn refusal to admit they were drowning. The preliminary sale agreement had seemed like a lifeline then. Secret, temporary, reversible. Now it was a chain around her throat, downstairs. Amelia's office door closed, the altered audio open on her laptop, the truth pulsing in blue waves across the screen. All she had to do was tell Noah. All she had to do was destroy herself first. Evening came early under a sky heavy with rain. Amelia spent the rest of the day making calls. Not to defend her heart, that apparently had been foolishly exposed and promptly injured. She called legal counsel, board members, investors. She froze discretionary expenditures in Maple Harbor. She suspended all community outreach pending review. Each decision was rational. Each one felt like placing a stone over something still alive. At 6, Mara brought her coffee and found her staring at the first concept sketch of the revised waterfront plan. The one with the public pier preserved, the fish market restored, the old cannery turned into workshops for local trades. "Should I cancel tomorrow's meetings?" Mara asked gently. Amelia looked at the drawing for a long time. Then she said, "Cancel everything." Mara's expression changed. Everything. The project, the acquisition, the hearings, all of it. Prepare formal withdrawal documents. I'll announce that Heartstone is no longer pursuing development in Maple Harbor. But Amelia, if you leave now, Victor, Victor can explain to the board why the most politically toxic deal in our portfolio is no longer worth the cost. And the town? Amelia folded the sketch and slid it into her bag. The town has made its position clear. That night, rain began to fall over Maple Harbor, light at first, then steady. It washed chalk protest words from the sidewalk outside her office. It shone on the broken window now covered with plywood. It blurred the warm squares of homes where families ate dinner, argued, forgave each other, belonged. Amelia packed one suitcase. She did it with the efficiency of someone who had left many rooms without expecting to be missed. Cream blouse folded over navy trousers, laptop charger coiled, her mother's old photograph tucked between two files. The small jar of sea glass May had given her sat on the dresser for a long moment before Amelia finally placed it in the side pocket. At the bus station, there were only 3 benches, a vending machine humming tiredly, and a timetable warped by years of salt air. The last bus to Boston was due at 9:40. Amelia arrived at 9:12. No driver, no assistant, no security. Just one woman in an expensive coat, sitting beneath a flickering fluorescent light with a suitcase beside her and rain jeweled in her hair. She had already sent the email to legal. Effective immediately, Heartstone Properties will withdraw all development activity from Maple Harbor. Her thumb hovered over the final confirmation. For once, leaving was not strategy. It was surrender. A truck pulled into the empty lot with its headlights cutting through the rain. Amelia did not look up at first. She thought it might be someone coming to tell her she had no right to sit there either. Then the engine stopped. The door opened. Footsteps crossed the wet pavement, slow and disbelieving. When she finally raised her eyes, Noah stood under the edge of the station roof, rain darkening his jacket, his face pale with something too urgent to be anger. His gaze dropped to her suitcase, then to the phone in her hand. "Amelia," he said, voice rough. "What are you doing?" She looked at him through the thin, exhausted distance between pride and heartbreak. "I'm leaving," she said, "and I'm cancelling the project." For a long moment, the rain spoke louder than either of them. It tapped the metal roof of the bus station, slid down the glass panels in trembling lines, and gathered in shallow silver pools around Noah's boots. Amelia's phone screen glowed in her hand, cold and final. One more touch, and Maple Harbor would become a closed file, another scar hidden under polished language and legal signatures. Noah looked at her as if he had arrived a few seconds before the last page of something he could not bear to lose. But he did not say stay. He did not reach for her hand. He did not offer the kind of desperate confession that could be mistaken for rescue. Instead, he stepped out of the rain, stopping a careful distance from her suitcase, and said, "I was wrong." Amelia's fingers tightened around the phone. The words were simple, too simple for the damage already done. Yet because they were not wrapped in excuses, they found the one place inside her she had been protecting all day. Noah swallowed, his eyes lowered, not in weakness, but in shame. "I heard that recording and I let become proof of what I was already afraid of," he said. "That people like you come here, say the right things, learn our names, and still leave with everything in their hands. I didn't ask you, I didn't wait, I didn't even give you the dignity I keep demanding from everyone else." Amelia laughed once, but there was no humor in it. It was a soft, broken sound, like a cup cracking in warm water. "Dignity," she repeated. "That is an expensive word in my world. Everyone claims to value it, but they only respect it when it belongs to someone powerful." Noah's face flinched, but he accepted the blow. "You deserved better from me." She looked away. Beyond him, Main Street was blurry through the curtain of rain. The bakery sign had gone dark. The harbor beyond it was only a black ribbon under the night sky, the boats rocking in their slips like exhausted animals. Maple Harbor had rejected her in the town hall with one collective breath, and still it looked unbearably gentle from a distance. That was the cruelty of places. They could hurt you and still remain beautiful. Amelia lowered the phone into her lap. I spent my whole life learning not to need that, she said quietly. Better fairness, belief. If I needed them, then people could withhold them. So I built things, bought things, controlled things. I became useful, successful, frightening enough that no one would see how easy it was to wound me. The confession cost her more than she expected. She felt it scrape her throat on the way out. No sat on the bench beside her, leaving space between them, as if that space was a promise that he would not take what she was not ready to give. My mother used to say I was born with a hammer in one hand and an apology in the other. He said after a while, I fix everything that can be fixed with wood, nails, money I don't have, time I don't have, but people, he exhaled. I hide behind the town because it's safer than admitting what I personally can't lose. Amelia turned toward him. The fluorescent light hummed above them, making his wet hair darker, his face more tired. He looked less like the man who had stood against her at the dock the first day, broad-shouldered and unmovable, and more like someone who had been holding up a roof alone for too many years. You mean Lily, Amelia said. And May, and the house, and the memory of my grandfather. His mouth twisted. And maybe the idea that if I keep fighting for everybody, no one can accuse me of failing the people closest to me. The rain softened, then thickened again. Amelia's eyes fell to the suitcase. I thought leaving would protect you, she admitted. The town already thinks I came here to steal from them. Heartstone's board thinks I've become sentimental. Victor is circling like a man who has waited years for me to bleed in public. If I stay, everyone near me becomes leverage. No, Noah said, and this time there was steel beneath. The gentleness. If you leave now, Victor wins twice. He gets your company, and he gets to decide what the truth looks like here. The name sat between them like a third person. Amelia's expression changed, not softened, not hardened, focused. The woman the business magazines photographed. The woman who could walk into a room full of men twice her age and make them forget to interrupt. You believe me? She asked. Noah looked at her fully. I should have believed you before I had proof, he said. But I'm here now, and I'm asking you to let me stand where I should have stood in the first place. Something fragile moved through Amelia's chest. Not forgiveness, not yet. Something braver than forgiveness. Trust, perhaps, before it had healed enough to be comfortable. Her phone vibrated suddenly in her palm. Both of them looked down. Lily Reed's name flashed across the screen. Amelia hesitated. Noah reached for his own phone, but before he could call back, headlights swept across the bus station again. A small blue sedan braked too sharply at the curb, sending rainwater over the sidewalk. Lily stumbled out with her hood half fallen off, clutching a laptop bag to her chest as if it contained a beating heart. Her face was flushed, eyes bright with panic and triumph. No, she called. He was on his feet instantly. Lily hurried under the roof, breathless, rain clinging to her lashes. For one painful second, she looked from her brother to Amelia and seemed unsure where to place her guilt. Then she faced Amelia first. I'm sorry, Lily said, voice trembling, for signing, for hiding it, for letting fear make me stupid. Amelia stood slowly. There were dozens of responses available to her, most of them elegant and distant. She chose none of them. Fear makes all of us stupid, she said. What did you find? Lily's shoulders sagged as if mercy hurt more than anger. She opened the laptop on the bench, fingers shaking over the keyboard. The recording from the town hall, the one that made it sound like you said. Maple Harbor was emotionally exploitable. I knew something was off. The cadence was wrong. My friend Jonna works freelance audio for weddings and court depositions, so I sent him a copy. He pulled the waveforms apart. Noah leaned over the screen. Amelia stayed very still. Lily clicked open a file. Green and blue lines appeared against a black background, broken into segments. Here, these cuts are too clean. Someone lifted phrases from 3 different calls. This part, emotionally attached residents, was from your planning call about preserving historical structures. This part, pressure points, was from Victor talking about the council vote, but they put it under your voice. Track by cleaning the background noise and layering your audio over it. Amelia felt the station tilt slightly, though she did not move. Victor had not simply betrayed her. He had built a version of her from pieces and fed it to the town like poison. Lily clicked another folder, and there's metadata. The edited file was exported from software registered to a Heartstone media consultant. Not your office, Victor's crisis communications team. No, straightened slowly. His face had gone pale with anger. Can you prove that? He asked. Enough to start, Lily said. Jonah says we need the original server logs to make it airtight. But this shows alteration, and there's more. She glanced at Amelia. The file was uploaded to a private distribution link 12 minutes before the mayor's assistant sent it to the council members. Amelia closed her eyes. Mayor Caldwell Victor, the old land records. Her mother's name dragged through history like a stain that had never belonged to her. When Amelia opened her eyes again, there was no rain in them, no retreat. Send everything to my secure email, she said. Lily nodded quickly. No watched Amelia, cautious. What are you going to do? She looked out toward the street, toward the town that had humiliated her, the company that wanted to contain her, the dead woman who had never been defended in life. For years, Amelia had believed power meant never allowing anyone to see you cornered. Tonight, under the leaking roof of a bus station, with a carpenter beside her and a frightened young woman, handing her the first sharp piece of truth, she understood power differently. It was not the ability to leave untouched. It was the courage to stay, be seen fighting for something other than yourself. I'm not cancelling the project, she said. Noah's jaw tightened, but he did not interrupt. I'm cancelling the old version, Amelia continued. No luxury wall around the harbour. No private marina cutting off the public dock. No displacement disguised as opportunity. I'll present the revised plan publicly. Community ownership stakes. Protected rents for local businesses, restoration funds for historic homes, and an independent trust for the waterfront. Lily stared at her. The board will hate that. They already do. And Victor? No asked. Amelia's mouth curved faintly, but the smile held no warmth. Victor wanted a fight in the dark, she said. I'm going to give him one in daylight. Noah stepped closer, not enough to touch her, but enough that she felt his presence like warmth after cold water. You won't be standing alone, he said. Amelia looked at him then. There were still things unresolved between them. The hurt did not disappear because evidence appeared on a laptop. His doubt had cut her. Her pride had cut him. Their families were tangled in old silences, in names buried under official lies. Love, if that was what waited ahead of them, would not arrive clean and easy. But trust did not always begin as certainty. Sometimes it began as 2 people choosing the same direction while still afraid. I know, she said softly. And because the words felt too intimate, too dangerous, she picked up her suitcase herself and set it aside, away from the bus lane. Noah noticed. He did not smile, not quite, but something in his shoulders loosened. And for the first time that night, the station seemed less like a place of departure. They worked until after midnight, in a small office behind Reed Carpentry, because Noah refused to let Amelia return to the inn where reporters might be waiting, and Amelia refused to waste time, pretending she needed sleep. May arrived with a thermos of coffee, and no questions. At first she only looked at Amelia, then at the laptop, then at Noah's expression, and understood enough to set 3 chipped mugs on the workbench. You finally decided. Truth is heavier than pride, May murmured. Noah rubbed his forehead. That directed at me, at anyone carrying it, May said. Amelia accepted the coffee with both hands. The office smelled of cedar shavings, old paper, and rain-damp wool. Blueprints for porch repairs lay beside printouts of corporate ownership structures. Lily sat cross-legged on the floor, sorting timestamps. Noah pinned a map of Maple Harbor to the wall, marking parcels connected to the original Hartreed scandal. Amelia called 2 loyal attorneys in New York, 1 forensic accountant in Boston, and her assistant Clara, who answered on the second ring with a voice that sharpened instantly when Amelia said Victor's name. By 1:30, the pattern had begun to show itself. Shell companies connected to Victor's allies had purchased options on land adjacent to the proposed resort. If Amelia's original project passed, those parcels would triple in value. If she revised the plan into a community trust, their profit collapsed. Mayor Caldwell's office had fast-tracked permit language that favored those same parcels. And buried beneath it all, in scanned documents May had kept in an old biscuit tin, were references to the same survey firm that had helped ruin Eleanor Hart and Thomas Reed decades before. Amelia touched her mother's signature on one yellowed copy. Eleanor's handwriting was young there, hopeful. Nothing like the stiff signature Amelia remembered from charity programs and cold birthday cards. She tried to stop it. Amelia whispered. May stood beside her, eyes shadowed with memory. She and Thomas both did, but people with money called it ambition, and people without money called it betrayal. The truth got buried because everyone was ashamed of needing it. Noah looked at Amelia. Over the papers, no one spoke for a while. Outside, the rain finally ended. The town slept under wet roofs and porch lights, unaware that its history had begun to breathe again in a carpenter's back office. At 2:07 a.m., Amelia's phone rang. Clara. Amelia answered on speaker because secrecy had already cost too much. Tell me, she said. Clara's voice came through tight and low. Victor knows you accessed the archive server. He's moving faster than expected. Amelia straightened. Noah's eyes lifted to hers. What did he do? Amelia asked. There was a pause. Then Clara said, he sent notice to the board 15 minutes ago. Emergency session at 8 in the morning. Motion of no confidence. He's claiming you acted against shareholder interests, exposed the company to reputational harm, and became personally compromised by your relationship with a local opposition leader. The room went silent. Lily's hand froze over the keyboard. May closed her eyes. Noah's face changed first with anger, then with the sick understanding that his name had become a weapon aimed at Amelia's throat. Clara continued, each word colder than the last. Amelia, he's calling for your immediate removal as CEO before you can present the revised Maple Harbor plan or the evidence of historical fraud. By dawn, Maple Harbor was still wrapped in a blue-gray hush, but Amelia had already stopped belonging to the quiet. The evidence lay inside a slim black drive in her coat pocket. May's kitchen light glowed behind her like a small stubborn star as she stepped out into the cold morning. And for one brief second, Amelia wanted to turn back. Not because she was afraid of Victor. Not even because the board might remove her from the company she had built with her bloodless discipline and sleepless years. She wanted to turn back because inside that warm kitchen, Noah had looked at her not like she was a billionaire, not like she was a Hart, not like she was someone who always knew the next move. He had looked at her like she was a woman about to walk into a fire, and then he had said, I'm coming with you. She had almost refused. The city was not kind to people like Noah Reed. It measured worth in tailored wool, imported shoes, inherited surnames, and the ability to say cruel things in polite voices. Noah wore a clean dark jacket, the best shirt Lily had ironed for him with nervous hands, and the quiet dignity of a man who had fixed roofs in winter and held his family together with calloused palms. Amelia knew exactly what the board would see. They would not see his courage. They would not see the way he had stood in the rain before a bulldozer, or the way he listened when May spoke, or the way his face softened whenever Lily pretended she wasn't scared. They would see a carpenter, a complication, A man from a town worth more to them as waterfront inventory than as a living place. You don't have to do this, Amelia told him as Clara's driver waited beside the black car. Noah glanced at the glassy road ahead, then back at her. Neither do you. That answer stayed between them all. The way to the city. The farther they drove from Maple Harbor, the more the landscape hardened. Pine trees gave way to warehouse roofs, then expressways, then towers rising out of a morning fog like polished blades. Amelia had once loved that sight. The city had been her battlefield and her proof. Every floor of every building had represented a number she had conquered, a man who had underestimated her, a door she had forced open. Today the towers looked less like victory and more like walls. Heartstone Properties occupied 48 floors of a mirrored building downtown, crowned by a private boardroom where decisions were made about towns whose residents would never be invited past security. When the car pulled up beneath the entrance canopy, cameras were already waiting. Victor had made sure of that. Reporters turned in a ripple as Amelia stepped out. Questions flew sharp and bright. Ms. Hart, did you conceal a personal relationship with the opposition leader in Maple Harbor? Is it true you misused company resources to investigate historical records? Will you resign before the board removes you? No moved half a step closer to her without touching her. Amelia could feel the restraint in him, the instinct to shield her fighting the knowledge that cameras turned protection into scandal. She lifted her chin, and the doors opened. Inside, the lobby smelled of marble polish, orchids, and money. Employees froze discreetly behind reception desks and security stations. Some looked away. Some watched with frightened loyalty. Some had already chosen Victor because people in corporations often mistook survival for morality. Clara met them near the private elevator, her face pale but composed. They moved the meeting up. Victor started without you. Amelia's mouth curved without warmth. Of course he did. Clara's gaze shifted to Noah. Something like apology flickered there. They'll try to provoke you. Noah gave a small nod. They can try. But as the elevator rose in silence, Amelia saw his reflection in the mirrored wall. He looked calm, but his fingers flexed once at his side, not from fear, from the pressure of entering a room designed to make honest men feel underdressed for their own dignity. She wanted to take his hand. She didn't. Not yet. The boardroom doors opened to a long table of black glass and white leather chairs. Beyond the windows, the city stretched under a pale sun, indifferent and expensive. 12 directors sat waiting. Most were men Amelia had known for years, grey-haired, careful, their sympathy rationed according to market conditions. 2 women avoided her eyes. Victor Lang stood at the far end of the room beside the screen, looking immaculate in a navy suit, grief arranged on his face like a press release. Amelia, he said softly, as if welcoming a patient. We were concerned you might not appear. I own enough of this company to know where the boardroom is, she replied. A faint rustle moved around the table. Then one of the older directors, Warren Pike, looked past her to Noah. And this is. Amelia felt the air sharpen. No Reed, she said. He has information relevant to Maple Harbor. Warren's mouth barely moved. This is an emergency board meeting, not a town hall. Another director, Bancroft, gave a quiet laugh. Are we allowing contractors to advise billion-dollar asset strategy now? Noah's face did not change, but Amelia felt the humiliation land. It landed not loudly, not dramatically, but with the precise cruelty of people who never raised their voices because the world had always leaned down to hear them. He's not here as a contractor, Amelia said. He's here because your billion-dollar asset strategy was built on fraud. Victor sighed, as though disappointed in a beloved student. This is exactly the concern. Personal attachment has clouded your judgment. Instead of completing a profitable acquisition, you've aligned yourself with a local agitator whose interests are directly opposed to ours. No finally spoke, his voice steady, low, and too human for that sterile room. My interest is keeping families from being pushed out of the place they built. Warren adjusted his cuff. Mr. Reed, with respect, sentiment is not a financial model. Noam went still. Amelia loved him a little painfully in that moment. Victor's eyes cooled. This is absurd. No, Amelia said, moving to the table. What's absurd is that you called a vote to remove me before allowing review of evidence tying the Maple Harbor parcels to falsified deeds, suppressed municipal records, and a campaign of defamation against Eleanor Hart. Her mother's name changed the room, not dramatically. These were not people who gasped, but Amelia saw it. A tightening at Warren's jaw, a glance exchanged between two directors, Clara inhaling behind her, Victor recovered first. Eleanor Hart's reputation is not before this board. It should have been before my family decades ago. The voice came from the doorway. Amelia turned. Richard Hart stood there in a charcoal coat, silver hair combed back, posture straight despite his age. Her father had the kind of presence that made rooms remember hierarchy. He had taught Amelia the first rule of power. Never enter unless you are certain people will notice. They noticed for a moment. Amelia was 12 again, waiting outside his study with a perfect report card, hoping excellence might be mistaken for something like love. Father, she said. Richard's eyes moved over her face, then to Noah, where they paused with open disapproval. So it's true, he said. You brought him. Noah met his gaze. I came. Richard ignored him after that, which was somehow worse than insult. He stepped into the room, and the directors shifted almost imperceptibly. Richard no longer ran Heartstone initially, but old money did not retire. It lingered in signatures, in favors, in fear. Victor's expression softened into practiced respect. Mr. Hart, I'm glad you could join us. Amelia looked between them, and a cold understanding passed through her. You called him. Victor said nothing. Richard removed his gloves slowly. I came because someone has to stop my daughter from setting fire to her own house. My house? Amelia's laugh was quiet and bitter. Is that what you call it when the walls were built over buried records? Richard's face remained controlled, but his eyes flickered. You don't understand what you're holding. I understand Eleanor Hart was accused of betraying Maple Harbor. I understand forged documents connected her name to a land transfer that benefited developers who later fed capital into Hart family holdings. I understand Thomas Reed tried to expose it and was ruined too. Thomas's name. Noah's shoulders stiffened. Amelia stepped closer to her father. What I don't understand is how much you knew. The silence that followed was the most honest answer Richard had given her in years. Something inside Amelia broke very quietly. No, she whispered. Richard looked away toward the windows, toward the city he had helped build, the empire he had guarded more fiercely than he had ever guarded his wife. Your mother was young. Idealistic, she thought truth once spoken would protect people. It rarely does. Noah's voice cut in, rougher now. Did you know she was innocent? Richard's gaze returned to him, sharp with class contempt and old defensiveness. You are speaking about matters far beyond your understanding. No, Amelia said, and her voice trembled only once. He asked a simple question. Richard's jaw tightened. I knew enough to know the accusations were convenient. I knew enough to suspect she had been used. But by then the transaction had passed through multiple hands. Investors were involved. Banks, pension funds, contractors, families. The scandal was no longer a wound. It had become a foundation. Amelia stared at him. All her life her mother had been a ghost behind closed doors. Eleanor's sadness had been treated like an inherited weakness. Her silence like guilt. Her death like an unfortunate private matter, best handled without questions. Amelia had built herself into steel, partly because softness had failed Eleanor so completely. And now she understood. Softness had not failed her mother. Cowardice had. You let her carry it. Amelia said. You let people think she sold out a town and betrayed a man who trusted her. Richard's expression hardened, but beneath it, for the first time, she saw age, not wisdom, not remorse clean enough to respect, just exhaustion from decades of choosing preservation over love. I protected you, he said. Amelia almost smiled. It would have been easier if he had said he protected himself. You protected the Hart name. The Hart name fed you, educated you, opened every door you have ever walked through, and closed hers. The room had become so quiet that the hum of the climate control sounded vulgar. Victor stepped in, voice smooth. This is painful family history, certainly, but not material to the motion. The question before the board is whether Ms. Hart's judgment has been compromised. Amelia turned on him. My judgment became clearer the moment you tried to bury this. He smiled faintly. Or the moment you fell in love with a man who needs you to turn a corporation into a charity. Noah flinched then, not visibly to everyone perhaps, but Amelia saw it. And rage bloomed behind her ribs. She reached for his hand. This time she did not care who saw. Noah's fingers closed around hers, warm and rough, real in a room where everything else gleamed without heart. I am not ashamed of him, she said, and I will not let you use him to shame me. Warren cleared his throat and heart. Even if what you allege has merit, public exposure would trigger lawsuits of extraordinary scale, title disputes, restitution claims, criminal inquiries, shareholder panic. Then perhaps shareholders should panic, Amelia said. Perhaps people should panic when profit depends on stolen dignity. Richard's voice dropped. Enough. The word had ruled her childhood. Enough questions, enough tears, enough disappointment, enough wanting what could not be given. But Amelia was no longer a girl outside a locked study. No, she said, not enough. Richard looked at her for a long moment, and something like grief passed over his face. Then he opened the leather folder he carried and placed several documents on the table. These are preliminary exposure estimates, he said, prepared after Victor informed me of what you had accessed. Amelia did not move. Clara stepped forward, scanned the first page and went pale. Richard continued, each word slow, brutal and deliberate. If you release those archives and publicly challenge the original Maple Harbor transfers, Eleanor's name may be cleared, Thomas Reed's as well. The town may get its truth. Noah's grip tightened around Amelia's hand. But Heartstone's earliest capital chain will be questioned. Every project financed through those holdings becomes vulnerable. Creditors will freeze lines. Partners will withdraw. The stock will collapse before noon. Litigation could last a decade. Amelia felt the city tilt behind the windows. Richard looked not at Noah, not at the board, but at his daughter. At last he spoke without polish. And when the empire falls, Amelia, it will not be Victor who pays first. It will be thousands of employees. Secretaries, site workers, engineers, cleaners, people with mortgages, children, medical bills. You may save your mother's name, but you may destroy every family that now depends on ours. The room blurred at the edges. For years, Amelia had believed power meant having the courage to make hard decisions when others hesitated. Now, standing between the man she loved and the father who had failed her, mother, between a dead woman's innocence and living strangers' livelihoods, she understood the true cruelty of inherited power. It never came clean. It arrived covered in other people's fingerprints, other people's bread, other people's fear. Richard's final words settled over the boardroom like a sentence. So choose carefully, my daughter. Truth may clear the dead, but it can also bury the living. For a long moment after Richard spoke, no one in the boardroom moved. Outside the glass walls, the city continued its polished afternoon. Taxis flashing yellow between towers, office workers crossing streets with coffees in hand. Sunlight sliding over windows that had never once asked what price had been paid for their shine. Amelia stood at the head of the table and felt, almost physically, the weight of every signature her family name had ever carried. Heartstone Properties had been built like a cathedral to certainty. Contracts, acquisitions permits, quiet settlements, smiling photographs in business magazines, speeches about vision, about prosperity, about transforming overlooked land into future value. But now, beneath all those fine words, Amelia could hear the old sound of Maple Harbor's tide, not applause, not profit, water against stone, patient, returning, refusing to forget the shape of the shore. Noah stood several feet away from her, close enough that she could see the faint cut on his knuckle from where he had scraped it, repairing May's porch 2 mornings ago. Far enough that he did not rescue her with a look. His restraint hurt more than pressure would have. If he had demanded she choose truth, she could have fought him. If he had begged, she could have hidden behind the cruelty of necessity. Instead, he simply stayed, and that was the hardest mercy she had ever been given. Richard's warning remained in the air. Employees, families, mortgages, children. Victor Lang sat along the right side of the table, his silver tie smooth, his expression disciplined into corporate concern. Beside him, several board members watched Amelia with the nervous hunger of people who preferred morality when it came already insured. Amelia lowered her gaze to the folder in front of her. Inside were copies of old town ledgers, letters in Eleanor's handwriting. Thomas Reed's statement never entered into public record. Wire transfers linked to shell companies, emails Victor had thought permanently deleted, and Mayor Evelyn Caldwell's private correspondence with outside investors. A lifetime of silence had become paper. Paper was light, almost weightless, and still it could break a dynasty. Noah's voice came softly, not for the room, but for her. Amelia. She looked at him. There was no triumph in his eyes, no small-town righteousness, no demand that she burn down everything just to prove she loved him. He looked tired, afraid for her, and still proud before she had done anything worthy of it. "Whatever you decide," he said. "Don't make me the judge. Don't make love another courtroom where you have to prove you deserve to be chosen." Something inside her, held tight since childhood, trembled. All her life, love had arrived with conditions. Be excellent, be controlled, do not embarrass the family, do not ask about your mother when your father goes quiet, do not cry in public, do not need too much, do not fail. No had just opened a door she had not known was locked. Not because he was letting her go, because he trusted she could stand. When she spoke, her voice was calm, but not cold. For the first time, the calm belonged to her. "My father is right about one thing," she said. "The consequences will not fall neatly. They never do." Richard's face tightened. She touched the first folder. For years, Heartstone benefited from a lie. Amelia Hart was accused of betraying Maple Harbor, of helping developers acquire waterfront land through deception. Thomas Reed was painted as a resentful local who fabricated claims when negotiations failed. Those accusations shaped families. They shaped reputations. They shaped who was believed and who was dismissed. She opened the folder and passed copies down the table. The evidence shows Amelia Hart and Thomas Reed were framed. They were working together to expose illegal pressure tactics, forged purchase agreements, and bribery connected to the original harbor acquisition plan. Their evidence was buried. Their relationship was used against them. Eleanor was silenced by scandal. Thomas was left to carry shame that was never his. The room grew very quiet. One of the older board members, a woman who had served under Richard for 20 years, removed her glasses with unsteady fingers. Victor leaned forward. "Amelia, emotional reinterpretations of archival material are not a legal basis for." "Sit down, Victor." He blinked. The command had not been loud. It did not need to be. It carried the clean edge of an ending. Amelia placed a second stack of documents on the table. "These are recent communications between Victor Lang, Mayor Caldwell, and investment partners who expected priority access to Maple Harbor's waterfront after forced consolidation of residential lots. They include pressure strategies targeting elderly owners, delayed permit threats against local businesses, and fabricated community benefit projections used to mislead both this board and the town. Victor's mouth hardened. "You are making a catastrophic mistake." "No," Amelia said, "I am naming one." Richard stood abruptly. "Do you understand what you are doing?" For a heartbeat, she was 8 years old again, standing outside a closed study door, hearing adults stop speaking when she came near. She remembered her mother's perfume fading from the hallway, after Eleanor walked away from another dinner table where no one defended her. She remembered deciding that if tenderness made women disappear, she would become untouchable instead. But Eleanor had not been weak. She had been abandoned. And Amelia, who had inherited everything except the truth, finally understood that there were fortunes more shameful to keep than to lose. "Yes," she said to her father. "I understand now." She turned to the board. "Effective immediately, I am recommending the suspension of Victor Lang pending independent investigation. All Maple Harbor acquisitions will be frozen. Heartstone will cooperate with state authorities and release a public statement acknowledging historical wrongdoing connected to the harbor records. We will establish a restitution fund for affected families." Victor gave a short, humorless laugh. "And pay for that with what? Regret?" "With assets," Amelia replied. "Including my personal stake in the luxury resort plan." A murmur spread through the room. She continued before fear could gather itself into opposition. "The Maple Harbor project will not proceed as a private luxury enclave. The waterfront land currently under Heartstone control will be transferred into a community development trust. Residents will hold majority voting power. Existing homes and businesses will be protected from displacement. Any construction will prioritize local employment, affordable housing, harbor restoration, and small business grants. Heartstone may participate only as a minority development partner, under public oversight." Noah's expression changed then. Not relief exactly, something deeper, more painful, as if a burden he had carried for so long had become unfamiliar when it lifted. Richard stared at her, as though he had raised a daughter and was only now meeting the woman. "You will cut the company's projected return by more than half," he said. "At least you may lose investors. Yes, you may lose control." Amelia looked at the city beyond the glass, then back at him. Control was never the same as ownership. Not of a company, not of a life, not of a name. For the first time, Richard had no answer. The vote did not happen dramatically. Real power rarely collapses with music. It shifts through pale faces, whispered legal cautions, phones lighting up beneath polished tables. 2 directors opposed her outright. One abstained with cowardly elegance. The rest, confronted with evidence too dangerous to ignore, and a CEO willing to bleed before being blackmailed, chose survival, dressed as conscience. Victor was escorted out by security. 23 minutes later, he did not shout. Men like Victor rarely wasted rage in rooms where cameras might catch it. At the door, he turned back to Amelia, his face carved into something almost admiring. "You think confession makes you clean," he said. "It only teaches people where to stab." Amelia met his eyes. "Then I'll stop building armor and start building something worth defending." His smile thinned. No did not touch her until the room emptied. When he finally came to her, he did not embrace her in front of the remaining staff gathering papers with trembling hands. He simply stood beside her, shoulder near shoulder, both of them looking at the ruined battlefield of folders, pens, water glasses, and inherited sins. "You didn't do it for me," he said. "No good." That small word nearly broke her. She turned, and the tears she had refused for decades rose without asking permission. Noah saw them and did not look away. "I don't know what I have left after this," she whispered. He smiled faintly, sadly. "Maybe only what was yours to begin with." 2 days later, Amelia returned to Maple Harbor not in a helicopter, not with a motorcade, but in a rented dark blue sedan that smelled faintly of pine cleaner. The town had already heard. Of course it had. News traveled differently there, not faster than the internet perhaps, but with more judgment per mile. People paused outside the bakery as she passed. Mr. Bell from the bait shop lifted one hand. Not quite a wave, not quite forgiveness. Lily Reed stood outside the inn with her arms folded, eyes red from crying and lack of sleep. When Amelia approached, Lily looked as though she wanted to say 10 things and apologize for 5 of them. Instead, she said, "May made chowder." Amelia almost laughed, almost cried again. That sounds serious, it is. She only makes chowder when someone has been stupid, heartbroken, or heroic. Sometimes all 3 inside May's kitchen. The windows fogged from soup steam, and the late spring rain tapped lightly against the roof. May Reed sat at the table with Eleanor's old letters arranged before her, each one placed carefully as if memory deserved manners. She looked up when Amelia entered. "You have your mother's chin," May said. It was not the first time she had said something like that, but this time Amelia knew how to receive it. Was she brave, Amelia asked. May's weathered hands closed over one letter. She eased, but she was lonely. Those 2 things often get mistaken for each other. Noah was by the stove, sleeves rolled, stirring chowder with the concentration of a man restoring a chapel. Amelia watched him there, among worn cabinets and mismatched mugs, and felt an ache so tender it frightened her. This was not the life she had planned to want. That was perhaps why it felt real. The public meeting was held that evening. In the old Maritime Hall, every bench filled. Fishermen in work jackets sat beside teachers, retirees, teenagers, reporters, lawyers, and Heartstone representatives who looked visibly uncomfortable, without tinted glass between themselves and consequence. Amelia stood before them without notes. She apologized first, not strategically, not in passive language, not with the corporate grammar of mistakes were made, she said. Heartstone had profited from silence. She said Eleanor Hart and Thomas Reed had been wronged. She said the current project, as designed, would have repeated that violence in newer, prettier materials. She said the trust documents would be available for public review. She said no one would be asked to trade memory for progress. Some people cried. Some remained stone-faced. One man in the back shouted that apologies could not bring back dead parents or lost land. Amelia did not defend herself. "You're right," she said. "They can't. But money without apology is just a second insult. So we will begin with both restitution and record correction, and then we will keep showing up after the headlines leave." That was the moment Maple Harbor began. Not to forgive, but to listen. And sometimes listening was the first plank in a bridge. Then, just as the meeting was ending, Lily's phone buzzed. Then another. Then half the room seemed to ripple with incoming alerts. Noah looked down at his screen. His face went still. Amelia felt the change before she understood it. Victor had made good on his threat. Documents were spreading online. Grainy scans of an old payment ledger, suggesting the Reed family had once accepted money from the same corrupt developers Amelia had just exposed. Headlines were already forming like storm clouds. Local heroes family tied to harbor payoff. Reed legacy questioned. Billionaire romance built on mutual cover-up. The hall filled with whispers. Noah's hand tightened around the phone. For a second, Amelia saw him not as the man who had stood beside her in the boardroom, but as a boy inheriting shame before he was old enough to read the fine print. Mayor Caldwell, who had come to the meeting under legal pressure and sat pale near the aisle, suddenly looked as though the floor had vanished beneath her. May stood. She did not move quickly. Age and grief had made sure of that, but when she rose, the room quieted. "That money was real," May said. A low gasp passed through the hall. Noah turned to her, stricken. "May." She lifted one hand. "It was real," she repeated. "But it was not a bribe. It was hush money sent after Thomas refused to sign. He tried to return it. The bank would not process the reversal because the account had been closed. So he kept it untouched, hoping to use it as evidence. Before he could, the scandal broke. After that, no one would hear him. Mayor Caldwell's lips parted. Her eyes filled with a terror too old to be surprise. May looked at Amelia. "Your mother knew," she wrote it down. Amelia opened Eleanor's letters with shaking hands. There, in ink faded but steady, were the words that unmade Victor's final weapon. Thomas did not take their money. They forced it into his name to stain him if he spoke. "If anything happens to me, find the ledger behind Caldwell's copy, not the one they show the town." Lily, already moving, pulled up the duplicate file she and Amelia's investigator had recovered from the courthouse archive. The second ledger showed outgoing transfers from the developer's shell account, coded not as compensation but as containment expense. Beside Thomas Reed's name was one word: leverage. The room exhaled all at once. Noah closed his eyes. Amelia went to him then, not as rescuer, not as billionaire, not as a woman offering protection from above. She stood in front of him as someone who knew what it was to have a parent's ghost dragged into public and judged by strangers. "They tried to do to your family what they did to mine," she said quietly. His voice was rough, "and we almost let shame finish their work." "No," she said. "We're finished with shame doing other people's jobs." Across the hall, Mayor Caldwell began to cry. No one comforted her, not cruelly, simply because comfort, like trust, could not be claimed by position. It had to be earned, and she had spent too many years spending what was not hers. Victor's leak, meant to poison the ending, became the final proof of the pattern. Within a week, he was under investigation. Caldwell resigned before the council could remove her. Richard Hart issued a statement acknowledging Eleanor's innocence, but Amelia did not learn of it from him. She learned it from May, who clipped the article, tucked it into Eleanor's letters, and said, "Late is not the same as enough, but it is not nothing." Months later, the first sign at the harbor did not bear Heartstone's logo. It read, Maple Harbor Community Trust. Below it, in smaller letters, two names had been carved into reclaimed cedar by Noah's own hands: Eleanor Hart Memorial Walk, Thomas Reed Boatworks Pavilion. On the morning it was unveiled, fog rested over the water like a soft white shawl. Residents gathered with paper cups of coffee. Children chased each other between benches still smelling of fresh varnish. Lily argued with a contractor about ramp measurements. May sat wrapped in a blue coat, pretending not to cry. Amelia stood near the pier, her expensive shoes exchanged for boots after learning at last that coastal mud respected no net worth. Noel came to stand beside her, he said, looking at the modest foundation work beginning beyond the shoreline. "For a billionaire, you're getting very good at losing money." She smiled. The smile reached places in her that used to belong only to ambition. "I prefer to think of it as investing in things that don't leave." He glanced at her. "And are you staying?" The tide moved beneath them, steady and silver. Once, Amelia would have answered with a plan, a timeline, a structure that made longing sound efficient. Now she looked at Maple Harbor, the town she had come to purchase, the people who had refused to become numbers, the man who had not asked her to become smaller in order to be loved. Then she looked at Noah. "I'm not giving up my work," she said. "I wouldn't ask you to. I'll still be difficult. I noticed, and I don't know how to belong here yet." His hand found hers, warm and rough, asking nothing it did not also offer. "No one does at first," he said. "That's why people stay long enough to learn." Amelia leaned her shoulder lightly against his. For the first time in her life, the future did not look like a tower rising above everyone else. It looked like a harbor, imperfect, weathered, shared, and finally, home. Bonus story. The lighthouse keeper's daughter before Amelia Hart ever set foot on Harbor Road. The old lighthouse at the edge of Maple Harbor had a keeper, and the keeper had a daughter named Rosalind. Rosalind Doyle grew up counting waves, the way other children counted sheep. Her father, Samuel, had tended the light for 30 years, climbing the spiral stairs each evening with an oil can in one hand and a thermos of black coffee in the other, muttering to the lamp as if it were an old friend who needed convincing to stay lit. Rosalind used to sit on the bottom step and listen to him, talk to the glass, to the wind, to the ships that never answered back. When the automated beacon replaced the old lamp, the town threw Samuel a small retirement dinner at the Maritime Hall, the same hall where, decades later, Amelia Hart would stand before an angry crowd. Rosalind was 19 then, restless, certain that Maple Harbor was a place people left rather than a place people became. She left the following spring. She did not return for 11 years. What brought her back was not romance or ruin, but her father's declining health, and what she found on her return was a town smaller than she remembered, and somehow larger too, as if absence had rearranged the proportions of everything she thought she knew. The bakery had new owners. The bait shop had the same owner, older, slower, still opening at 5, and the lighthouse, dark and automated, stood at the edge of the water like a monument to a job that no longer needed a person to do it. Rosalind took to climbing the stairs anyway, the way her father once had. An oil can she no longer needed swinging uselessly at her side. It became a habit, then a ritual, then something she could not explain to the men who occasionally asked her to dinner, and grew quietly baffled when she preferred the tower to the table. It was on one of those evenings, with the sky bruising into violet over the water, that she met a marine biologist named Theo who had come to study the tide pools near the point. He found her sitting on the lighthouse steps, with a paperback she wasn't reading, and a thermos she wasn't drinking from, and he said, without preamble, that the barnacles on the North Rocks were unusually large this season, as if that explained why he was standing there. Rosalind laughed for the first time in months. They married 2 years later on the lighthouse steps, with Samuel Doyle, frail but upright, standing beside them in his old keeper's coat. May Reed made the cake. Half the town came because in Maple Harbor a wedding was never really private, and nobody minded. Rosalind never did leave again. She kept climbing the stairs each evening, not because the light needed tending, but because some habits are really just love, wearing the shape of duty until no one can tell the difference anymore. And on clear nights, if you stood at the harbor's edge and looked up, you could still see a small figure at the top of the tower, watching the water the way her father had taught her, as though the sea might still need someone to keep faith with it.